to rest. Thoughts spin around like a storm, questions about your future, regrets from your past, doubts about whether you're on the right path. You feel lost, uncertain, as if everyone else knows exactly where they're going while you're wandering in circles. But here's the truth. Feeling lost is not failure. It's part of being human. The Stoics knew this thousands of years ago. They understood that life is not a straight road, but a winding path filled with fog, detours, and crossroads. And instead of fighting that lostness, they taught us to embrace it, to see it as a teacher, not an enemy. Because sometimes, not knowing where you're going is the very thing that helps you discover who you really are. Tonight, you're not just going to hear words. You're going to let timeless Stoic wisdom guide you into rest. Each teaching you hear will not only calm your mind, but also remind you it's okay to feel uncertain. It's okay to pause. It's okay to not have all the answers. So get comfortable, breathe deeply, and prepare to let go of the weight you've been carrying all day. By the end of this, you won't just fall asleep. You'll fall asleep knowing that even in lostness, you are exactly where you need to be. The night is calm, and the world around you is slowing down. Your eyes may be heavy, but your thoughts are still restless. Somewhere inside, there's a quiet question rising. Why do I feel so uncertain? Why does it seem like I'm wandering without direction? These moments can feel heavy, almost like a secret weakness. Yet what if this isn't weakness at all? What if being unsure is not a flaw, but a stage every soul must pass through? The Stoics believed exactly that. They understood that no person can travel through life without seasons of confusion. To them, wandering was not proof of failure. It was proof that you are alive, still searching, still learning. They would tell you that those who think they know everything are the ones most blind. True wisdom comes from those who admit they are lost and keep walking anyway. Think about the way we are raised. From an early age, we are told to have goals, to know exactly what we want to be, to follow a clear plan that will carry us from childhood to success. We are told to choose a career, to stay on track, to move forward as if life were a straight road. And when we stumble, when we realize we don't know the way, we feel shame. We tell ourselves that something is wrong with us, but the Stoics would shake their heads gently at this. They would say that to wander is to be human. Even the wisest leaders, the strongest emperors, and the most disciplined philosophers faced nights when they didn't know what tomorrow would bring. Marcus Aurelius, a man who ruled one of the greatest empires in history, often wrote about doubt in his private notes. He admitted feeling unsure, admitted struggling to see the right choice, admitted feeling lost even while sitting on a throne. If someone with all the power of Rome could confess to wandering, then surely your uncertainty is not weakness. It is simply part of being alive. There is a freedom in letting yourself accept this truth. When you stop fighting against being lost, you make space for discovery. When you stop demanding that life give you all the answers, you become open to seeing what is right in front of you. Seneca once compared life to sailing. He said the winds are always shifting. The sea is never the same. No sailor controls the storm. What they control is the direction of their sails. To wander, then, is not to drift pointlessly. It is to learn how to adjust when the winds of life change. It is to let the unknown guide you toward places you never expected to reach. This permission to wander matters because it removes the pressure of perfection. So many of us live under the weight of, "I should already know." We look at others and think they have it figured out, but what you don't see are the countless moments of doubt that everyone hides. To be lost is not to fall behind. It is to be exactly where every person eventually finds themselves. It is the stage that forces growth. A child stumbles before they can walk. Adults stumble through confusion before they can truly live with wisdom. The Stoics were practical. They didn't deny that wandering is uncomfortable. They didn't tell people to smile and pretend everything is fine. They acknowledged the fear, the frustration, the anxiety that comes with not knowing. But instead of calling it weakness, they taught people to listen to it. That anxious energy is not there to destroy you. It is there to show you what you care about, what matters deeply to you, and what you are afraid to lose. If you can sit with that feeling, it becomes a teacher. It reveals attachments that may no longer serve you, and it points to values that need to be rediscovered. Epictetus, who was born a slave and later became a philosopher, understood this better than anyone. He lived much of his life with no control over where he was, no certainty about his future, and no security in the present. If anyone had reason to despair at being lost, it was him. But instead, he found freedom within. He taught that when you cannot control the road beneath your feet, you can still control how you walk it. He turned his wandering into wisdom. His lesson is simple. Stop asking, "Why am I here?" and start asking, "What can I learn from being here?" Modern science now echoes this ancient truth. Psychologists have discovered that moments of uncertainty actually awaken the brain. When we don't know the way, our minds work harder to make sense of things, to connect ideas, to discover solutions. This is why many breakthroughs happen after long periods of confusion. The mind, forced out of its comfort zone, begins to see differently. What feels like lostness is often the soil where creativity grows. The Stoics didn't know neuroscience, but they knew the power of struggle. They saw that life's hardest seasons often plant the seeds of wisdom. There is also a quiet beauty in wandering. Think of the times you've taken a walk without a destination, when you allowed yourself to notice the small details of the world, the color of the sky, the way a leaf turns in the wind, the sound of distant laughter. Wandering in life can be similar. When you release the pressure of needing a clear direction, you begin to notice the small lessons that certainty would have blinded you to. A conversation with a stranger, a book you didn't plan to read, a mistake that forces you onto a new road, all of these become meaningful when you allow yourself to wander without fear. Of course, wandering does not mean giving up. The Stoics were never advocates of surrendering to despair. What they taught instead was flexibility. Life is unpredictable. Plans collapse, goals change, dreams shift. To wander with strength means to stay open to this unpredictability, to move with it rather than against it. It means holding on to your values as a compass rather than demanding a map for every step. The compass tells you who you are and what matters. The map, on the other hand, will always change, sometimes without warning. So when you feel lost, remind yourself that you do not need to carry the whole map in your head. You only need to know the values that will guide your next step. The Stoics taught that virtue, living with honesty, courage, wisdom, and self-control, is the compass that never fails. Even if the road twists and turns, as long as you hold on to that compass, you are never truly without direction. Let this sink in. Uncertainty does not mean you are failing. It means you are living. It means you are growing. Every human before you has wandered. Every soul has questioned. Every wise person has been unsure. Feeling lost is the shared thread of humanity, not the mark of failure. As you rest tonight, give yourself this permission. Allow yourself to be in the space of not knowing. Release the heavy demand to have every answer. Understand that the very state of being lost may be shaping you into someone wiser, more resilient, more open to life's possibilities. You are not broken, you are simply in motion. And this wandering, this not knowing, may be the exact preparation you need for what lies ahead. So, close your eyes with this thought. You are allowed to wander. You are allowed to feel uncertain. And far from being a sign of weakness, it may be the strongest, most human thing about you. For those who dare to admit they are lost are often the ones who truly find the way. When you accept that wandering is not weakness, but a stage of becoming, something shifts inside. The weight of shame lightens, and the fog begins to take on a new form. What once felt like confusion now starts to look like a mirror. Lostness doesn't just leave you empty, it quietly reveals truths you could not see when the path seemed clear. It strips away illusions, shows you the things you hold too tightly, and brings to the surface the attachments you never realized were controlling you. In this way, being lost becomes one of life's most powerful teachers, offering perspective no comfort zone could ever give. This is where the Stoics spoke with unusual depth. They knew that when life shakes you from your routines, you begin to notice what you leaned on most. At first, the feeling is unsettling. You discover that the goals you thought defined you may not bring the satisfaction you expected. You realize that the identity you've worked so hard to maintain is fragile. Yet this disruption is not meant to destroy you. It is meant to show you what is real and what is decoration. When disorientation enters, it pulls back the curtain on dependency. You suddenly see that much of your peace rested on conditions you couldn't control: your reputation, your possessions, your social circle, your sense of importance. These are the things the Stoics called externals, the things they placed under the category of indifference. Not because they had no value, but because they are never truly in your power. When life pushes you off balance, you learn quickly which parts of you were built on solid ground and which were built on sand. This lesson can feel harsh, but it is also liberating. If your peace crumbles every time fortune changes, then it was never peace at all. True stability, the Stoics argued, comes from knowing what belongs to you and what doesn't. You cannot control what others think of you, but you can control the honesty of your own actions. You cannot guarantee wealth, but you can govern how wisely you use what you have. You cannot prevent every loss, but you can shape how you meet it, with despair or with resilience. Lostness has a way of pushing these lessons to the surface in a way comfort never can. When everything is steady, you rarely question what holds you together. But when the ground shifts, you see clearly what you were gripping. Perhaps it was a job title that gave you a sense of worth. Perhaps it was the approval of a parent long after childhood had ended. Perhaps it was the illusion of control, believing that careful planning could guard you from the unexpected. When disorientation strips these away, you are left facing yourself, and in that reflection lies both the pain and the gift. Seneca once wrote that adversity introduces a man to himself. Lostness does the same. It shows you the parts of your identity that were borrowed, the roles you were playing because you thought they made you valuable. It gives you the chance to step back and ask, if this is taken from me, who am I really? These questions are uncomfortable, but they open the way to freedom. You begin to see that you are more than your labels, more than your possessions, more than the stories others tell about you. Perspective comes slowly, but it comes with clarity. You may realize that the things you chased were not truly your own desires. but expectations handed down by others. You may see that the fear of losing approval shaped more of your choices than your genuine values. You may discover that the routine you thought kept you safe was also keeping you small. Lostness exposes these hidden contracts we make with life, those silent agreements where we trade freedom for comfort, authenticity for acceptance. Once exposed, they can no longer control you in the same way. The Stoics believed that life's disturbances were not punishments, but reminders. They were the sharp taps on the shoulder that forced you to wake up. In this way, being lost becomes a reset button. It shakes you free from the momentum of habits and asks you to look again at what you're doing and why. Marcus Aurelius urged himself to consider every day as if it were his last, not to breed fear, but to sharpen his sense of what mattered most. When lostness interrupts, it gives you that same sharpening. It asks, are you living by accident or by design? Consider the way a traveler reacts when they lose the path in a forest. At first, there is panic, but as the adrenaline fades, the senses heighten. The traveler listens more carefully to the wind, notices the direction of the sun, feels the texture of the ground. Disorientation teaches awareness. In life, the same process happens. When certainty dissolves, you begin to notice the small signals you ignored before. A conversation that sparks insight, a quiet desire long buried, a restlessness in your heart that tells you change is overdue. These become the landmarks of your inner map, guiding you towards something truer. Lostness also humbles us. It shows that no matter how strong or intelligent we think we are still subject to forces beyond our control. This humility is not defeat, but wisdom. It softens arrogance and builds compassion. When you know what it feels like to be without direction, you become gentler with others who are wandering too. You stop judging people by the clarity of their plans and start seeing the courage in their struggles. But there is another lesson hidden here. Lostness recalibrates desire. When the usual anchors disappear, you begin to ask deeper questions. What do I truly need? What do I truly want? And often the answers are far simpler than the lives we built around them. You may realize you don't need constant recognition, only meaningful work. You may discover you don't need endless possessions, only security and enough to share. You may learn that what brings the deepest peace is not control, but alignment with your values. In this way, disorientation is not the enemy of direction. It is the seedbed of true direction. Epictetus would often remind his students that if something external can be taken from you, then it never truly belonged to you. Only your judgments, your choices, your character remain fully yours. Lostness forces you to test this truth. When the externals fall away, you face the question of what remains. At first, it can feel like nothing, but slowly, if you allow the lesson, you realize that what remains is the core of you, the part that no storm can touch. That is where real freedom lies. There is an old saying that perspective is not what you look at, but how you look at it. Lostness teaches this by necessity. Two people can face the same confusion, but one collapses under it, while the other discovers clarity. The difference lies not in the situation, but in the perspective. The Stoics trained themselves to see every disruption as material for growth. They didn't deny the pain, but they asked, how can this shape me? What does this reveal about what I cling to? How can I become freer through this? In asking these questions, disorientation transforms into wisdom. As the lesson deepens, lostness shows its most profound gift. It breaks the illusion of permanence. It reminds you that nothing external is guaranteed, that life is always in motion. Far from making life bleak, this realization sharpens your gratitude. You learn to treasure what is here now instead of clinging to what may vanish tomorrow. The Stoics practiced this through daily reflection, reminding themselves that fortune is a guest, not a possession. When you live with this awareness, lostness no longer terrifies. It becomes a reminder to love what is present while it is present. The perspective gained through wandering is not abstract. It is practical. It shapes the way you handle relationships, the way you pursue work, the way you care for your own mind. You stop chasing approval that never satisfies. You stop wasting time on desires that leave you empty. You begin to build your life on values that endure through uncertainty. And in doing so, you find a strength that no external storm can wash away. So when confusion enters, let it teach you. Let it reveal the attachments that were silently steering your choices. Let it strip away the illusions of control. Let it humble you, awaken you, sharpen you. For though lostness feels like emptiness, it is often the very space where your truest direction takes root. And as you rest tonight, remember, the path may twist, the signs may fade, the map may vanish, but the perspective gained in wandering will always light the way forward. You are not simply lost. You are being shown what matters most. When lostness teaches you to see attachments clearly and helps you reorder what truly matters, another lesson quietly follows. It is not about moving faster, nor about rushing toward a new direction. It is about stillness. The Stoics called this suspension a deliberate pause in judgment when the way ahead is covered in fog. Most people react instantly, trying to escape discomfort with quick answers. Yet wisdom lives in the pause, in the ability to hold back your judgment long enough to let truth rise on its own. There is a unique strength in restraint. The urge to decide quickly often comes from fear, the feeling that uncertainty itself is dangerous. But the Stoics argued that the greater danger lies in hasty judgment. When you rush to label something as good or bad, right or wrong, you close the door to other possibilities. Suspension teaches patience in thought, giving space for clarity that speed cannot provide. This art of waiting before deciding is not passivity. It is active discipline, a training of the mind to resist the pull of impulsive reaction. To suspend judgment is to say, I will not let appearances rule me. I will give my reason time to separate what is within my control from what is not, to measure whether my thoughts are grounded in truth or distorted by emotion. In daily life, this practice shows itself in countless ways. A harsh word is spoken to you, and the instinct is to call it an insult. Yet if you suspend judgment, you can ask, what if it was spoken from ignorance, from pain, from misunderstanding? Without the pause, anger takes over. With the pause, compassion may find space. A sudden misfortune strikes, a lost job, a broken plan. The reflex is to call it disaster. But if you hold judgment, you may later see it as an opening, a redirection, even a gift. This is why Epictetus advised his students to not be swept away by first impressions. Appearances, he said, are persuasive, but they are not always true. Suspension is also protection against manipulation. The world constantly pulls at your emotions, trying to win your instant approval or outrage. Advertisers, politicians, even acquaintances often rely on your tendency to react without reflection. By practicing suspension, you build a shield. You learn to stop and ask, what is being asked of me? What assumptions are hidden here? What do I know for certain, and what is only guesswork? This habit turns confusion into strength, because while others rush into traps of judgment, you stand steady, waiting until you see clearly. But why is this so difficult? Because the human mind craves certainty. Uncertainty feels like standing on shifting ground, and the instinct is to grab any stone, even if it is unstable. Suspension demands that you resist this craving, that you hold steady in uncertainty without rushing to resolve it. This is where courage meets patience. The Stoics saw it as an exercise in freedom, the freedom not to be pushed by appearances, not to be ruled by fear of the unknown. Consider how Marcus Aurelius approached his own doubts. In his writings, he constantly reminded himself that what appears as harm may not be harm, and what appears as fortune may not be fortune. He trained his mind to wait, to test impressions before granting them power. This was not detachment in the cold sense, but clarity in action. By suspending judgment, he made room for reasoned choice instead of impulsive reaction. This practice also reshapes relationships. How often do conflicts arise because we assume motives, because we judge another's words before understanding them fully? Suspension interrupts this cycle. By pausing, you allow space for listening, for asking questions, for recognizing that your first interpretation might be wrong. This humility does not weaken you, it strengthens connection. It shows that you are not enslaved by ego, but guided by clarity. The benefits of this discipline extend even to the inner world. How many times have you judged yourself harshly at the first sign of failure? Without suspension, a single mistake becomes evidence of unworthiness. With suspension, you create distance between the event and the conclusion. You can say, "This happened, but I will wait before deciding what it means." Perhaps it is not failure, but a step toward growth. Perhaps it reveals not weakness, but resilience in practice. By pausing, you soften the grip of self-condemnation and make space for understanding. Suspension also refines desire. When you feel a surge of wanting, whether for recognition, possession, or comfort, the instinct is to label it as necessary. But if you suspend judgment, you can ask, will this truly serve me? Or is it just appearance, a passing impulse dressed as need? In pausing, you gain freedom from desires that lead to emptiness. You begin to want less blindly and to choose with greater wisdom. There is an elegance to this way of living. It does not mean standing still forever, refusing to act. It means training yourself to act from clarity instead of impulse. The Stoics understood that time reveals much. An insult often fades when ignored. A misfortune may turn into opportunity when given months to unfold. A desire that feels urgent today may seem irrelevant tomorrow. By pausing, you align your choices with what endures rather than with what passes. This is not easy, but it is a discipline like any other. Just as the body strengthens through exercise, the mind strengthens through repeated practice of suspension. Each time you resist the urge to judge instantly, you build the muscle of patience. Each time you withhold agreement from a deceptive impression, you train the mind to stay free. Over time, what once felt like effort becomes natural, and what once felt like hesitation becomes wisdom. Even modern psychology speaks to this. Studies on mindfulness show that the ability to pause before reacting reduces stress, improves decision-making, and strengthens emotional regulation. What the Stoics practiced as suspension, we now understand as giving the brain space to engage reason rather than instinct. The wisdom of the ancients is confirmed. Clarity lives in the pause. Suspension also connects deeply to the Stoic view of control. They taught that while you cannot control events, you can control your judgments of them. To suspend judgment is to keep that control firmly in your own hands. The world may throw appearances at you, but you choose whether to accept them. This is sovereignty of the mind, a freedom that no external force can take. There is also peace in this practice. Much of life's turmoil comes not from events themselves, but from the judgments we rush to place upon them. By suspending judgment, you silence the storm of unnecessary suffering. A setback no longer has to be labeled catastrophe. A silence from a friend no longer has to be labeled rejection. In the pause, you find calm. You create room for a more generous interpretation, for patience, for kindness. Suspension even sharpens your relationship with time. When you rush to judgment, you are trapped in immediacy. When you pause, you step outside of time's pressure. You create a small eternity in which thought can settle and wisdom can surface. This timeless moment becomes a refuge, a place where clarity gathers before action resumes. Over and over, the Stoics reminded themselves and their students to watch impressions closely. Epictetus warned that appearances come with great force, but the wise person resists being carried away. He urged a mental practice. When a thought arises, test it. Ask if it belongs in your control. Wait before giving it power. This is suspension in action, a skill that transforms confusion into steadiness. As you reflect tonight, consider the ways you can begin this practice. The next time an emotion surges, instead of rushing to label it, breathe and wait. The next time you feel pressure to decide instantly, give yourself space. The next time an impression tries to dictate your judgment, hold it at arm's length until reason can examine it. In these small pauses, you will discover a strength quieter than action, but more enduring than reaction. Suspension is not about withdrawal from life. It is about entering life more wisely. It is the art of holding back enough to see clearly, of pausing long enough to act with intention. It is the discipline that transforms lostness into clarity, confusion into wisdom, and uncertainty into freedom. So, as you close your eyes and prepare for rest, let this teaching settle. You do not need to judge every thought, every event, every moment instantly. You have permission to wait, to breathe, to let things unfold before deciding their meaning. In that pause lies your freedom, your clarity, your peace, and in that space of suspension, you will find the quiet power the Stoics cherished, a power that can guide you even when every path ahead seems hidden in mist. When you practice suspension and give yourself permission to pause before rushing to judge, you notice something remarkable. Even in the silence of not knowing, there is still a direction within you that does not vanish. It is not written on a map, not handed to you by society, not dependent on fortune's gifts or losses. It is the quiet compass of virtue, and the Stoics believed it was the only true guide a person ever needed. Certainty is what people usually crave. The map, the plan, the assurance that one step will lead to another, and that outcomes can be predicted. But life has never worked like a map. Roads collapse, signs fade, storms block the way. And if your security rests only on having a clear external map, the moment it disappears, you feel broken. The Stoics offered a different way. Instead of chasing a map that cannot last, build within yourself a compass that never fails. This compass was not about directions in space, but directions of character. To them, virtue was the one thing that guaranteed you were on the right path, even when the world around you looked chaotic. Virtue meant living with wisdom, courage, justice, and self-control. These were not abstract ideals, but living tools meant to guide choices when everything else felt uncertain. A compass does not tell you every step, but it always points north. In the same way, virtue does not give you certainty about what will happen, but it always points you toward how to act well, no matter what happens. Consider wisdom. In moments of confusion, wisdom is the ability to see clearly what belongs to you and what belongs to fate. Without this compass, people panic, grasping at control where none exists. But with wisdom, you can conserve your energy for the things you truly govern: your response, your decisions, your integrity. This shift from chasing control to using wisdom is the beginning of peace. Then there is courage. When the road is dark, fear tells you to stop moving altogether. A map cannot always comfort you here because it cannot guarantee safety. But courage whispers, take the next step, even if the whole path is not visible. The Stoics admired courage not as recklessness, but as the steady refusal to let fear dictate your actions. Courage is the compass point that says, even if I do not know the end, I can still move forward with strength. Justice, another part of the compass, keeps your wandering from turning selfish. When you are lost, the temptation is to think only of yourself, to hoard resources, to ignore the needs of others. But justice reminds you that even in confusion, you are part of a larger human family. Your actions ripple outward. Choosing fairness, kindness, and responsibility ensures that your wandering strengthens community rather than harms it. This orientation prevents lostness from becoming isolation. And finally, self-control. When certainty vanishes, desire grows louder. The craving for quick relief or distraction becomes strong. Without a compass, you may run after every impulse, chasing false comforts that lead you further astray. Self-control is the compass point that anchors you. It says, do not let every craving pull you. Choose what aligns with your deeper values. This discipline turns lostness into refinement, shaping you into someone who is steady even when circumstances shift. Together, these virtues form a compass far more reliable than any map. A map tells you where to go, but it cannot adapt when the terrain changes. A compass always shows direction, no matter how the landscape shifts. The Stoics insisted that the person who lives by virtue cannot truly be lost, because their way of walking is guided by what endures. This way of thinking removes the obsession with outcomes. Maps focus on destinations. Compasses focus on orientation. By trusting a compass, you are free to accept that outcomes may differ from your plans, yet you remain aligned with what matters most. Seneca once said that no wind is favorable to the sailor who does not know to which port he sails. But he also taught that the wise person's true port is virtue itself, not external success. In other words, even if fortune sends storms, you reach your destination if your actions have been guided by virtue. Think about how this applies to ordinary struggles. A career path may collapse unexpectedly. If you lived only by the map, you feel devastated because the route you trusted is gone. But if you live by the compass, you ask, how can I meet this with wisdom? How can I act with courage? How can I remain just and disciplined? Suddenly the collapse is not the end, but the stage for practicing your highest values. Or consider relationships. Certainty tempts you to believe that people will always stay, always behave as you hope. When they disappoint, you feel betrayed. But with the compass, your focus is not on controlling others, but on living with justice and integrity yourself. You cannot stop others from leaving, but you can ensure that your own role in the relationship is guided by fairness, honesty, and love. This keeps your dignity intact no matter what others choose. The Stoics also warned against confusing the map with the compass in matters of desire. External goals, wealth, fame, recognition, are like destinations marked on a map. They may or may not be reached, and often they bring less fulfillment than expected. The compass of virtue, however, gives direction in every pursuit. If you chase wealth without virtue, it corrupts. If you chase recognition without virtue, it enslaves you to opinion. But if you pursue these with wisdom, courage, justice, and self-control, even if you fail to reach them, you succeed in character. This distinction is powerful because it transforms failure itself. On a map, failure means you did not reach the point you wanted. With a compass, failure is only if you abandon virtue. As long as you remain aligned with your compass, even loss can be victory, because it proved your steadiness. The Stoics believed that fortune could strip away everything, but it could never take virtue unless you gave it up yourself. That is why Epictetus, though born a slave, insisted that he was freer than many rich men, because his compass of virtue made him sovereign over himself, regardless of his outward condition. Modern life offers countless examples of why the compass is greater than the map. Technology shifts, economies rise and fall, relationships change overnight. To live by maps alone is to constantly redraw them in frustration. To live by the compass is to have stability in motion, clarity in change. You can walk through shifting times with confidence because your orientation remains steady. Even death, which terrifies those who live by the map, loses its sting when you live by the compass. A map ends at death. It is the final boundary. But the compass does not fear this boundary, because virtue can be practiced until the last breath. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself often that death is natural, not to be feared. His comfort came not from certainty about what lies beyond, but from knowing that as long as he lived, he could live with virtue. That was enough. This way of thinking demands trust in yourself, not in your impulses or emotions, which shift like weather, but in your capacity to live by values that endure. The compass is inside you, but you must choose to follow it. This is why the Stoics practiced daily reflection, journaling, and exercises to test their judgments. They were polishing their compass, making sure it pointed true. The more you rely on this compass, the freer you become. No longer do you depend on perfect maps, on promises of certainty, on guarantees that the world can never give. You walk into uncertainty with calm because your direction does not depend on the terrain. You know that storms may come, roads may vanish, losses may strike, but your compass still points true. And so, as you rest now, let this thought steady you. You do not need the whole map of life to feel secure. You only need the compass within. Align yourself with wisdom, courage, justice, and self-control, and no matter how the world shifts, you will not be lost. For those who live by maps are always at the mercy of change, but those who live by the compass of virtue carry their direction wherever they go. When you begin to trust the compass of virtue more than the map of certainty, something else awakens inside you. The grip of fear loosens, and the need for constant control starts to fade. Yet a new question rises quietly in the background. If virtue guides me within, where do I stand in the vastness beyond me? The Stoics did not avoid this question. They leaned into it. For them, to feel small in the cosmos was not a reason for despair, but an invitation to see life differently. There is a moment every human has felt, looking up at the night sky or watching the ocean stretch without end, when the scale of existence makes you aware of your own fragility. The Stoics treated that awareness as medicine, not poison. They believed that remembering your smallness heals arrogance, dissolves unnecessary anxieties, and teaches freedom. When you stop pretending to be the center of the universe, you discover a strange kind of lightness. You realize that much of what you fear matters less than you thought, and much of what you cling to is temporary anyway. Marcus Aurelius often reminded himself in his journals that even the greatest empires are dust in the scale of time. Generations rise, generations fall, and the universe continues indifferent to our worries. Far from discouraging him, this reflection grounded his perspective. If the universe is vast and time endless, then the insult of one person, the delay of one plan, the failure of one ambition cannot carry as much weight as our emotions make it seem. By setting your life against the backdrop of the cosmos, you place your troubles in their proper size. Feeling lost within this cosmic scale can also be liberating because it frees you from the burden of being extraordinary in the eyes of the world. When you realize that even the most famous figures of history are forgotten by most, the pressure to constantly prove yourself dissolves. You begin to live less for applause and more for alignment with your own compass. Seneca wrote that glory built on opinion fades quickly, but virtue remains. The cosmos itself does not care about your reputation, and that is good news. It means you can live truthfully without needing the crowd's approval. There is also humility here, the kind that reshapes how you relate to others. If you are small, then so is everyone else. No person is truly above or below another when viewed from the perspective of stars and centuries. Kings, workers, philosophers, and children all share the same fragile breath and will one day return to the same earth. This dissolves envy and arrogance. Why envy what vanishes so quickly? Why boast about what will be forgotten in time? Lostness, when set against cosmic citizenship, becomes less frightening. You see yourself as part of a shared human family moving through a temporary stage, equal in both limits and dignity. The Stoics describe this belonging through the concept of cosmopolis, the idea that every person is a citizen of the universe before they are a citizen of any one city or nation. This vision expands your identity. You're not merely the product of a hometown, a career, or a family name. You are woven into the fabric of nature itself. The air you breathe is shared. The stars above you shine on all. The cycle of seasons carries you along with every other living thing. When you feel lost, remembering that you are part of this greater whole can replace loneliness with connection. Yet this connection does not erase individuality. It gives it meaning. You may be small, but you are not meaningless. In the Stoic view, each person carries a role, however modest, in the harmony of the whole. Just as a single note matters to the melody, your choices contribute to the larger rhythm of existence. To live with virtue is to play your note well, without needing to control the entire song. This is why Epictetus advised focusing on your part in the cosmic play, leaving the script of the entire drama to the director, which is nature or fate. From this perspective, feeling lost is transformed into freedom. If you are not responsible for controlling the universe, then you can let go of the crushing weight of impossible expectations. You do not need to fix everything, own everything, or know everything. Your task is simpler: to play your role with integrity and let the rest unfold as it must. This is not passivity, but liberation, the relief of setting down what was never yours to carry. Modern science echoes this perspective in surprising ways. When astronauts describe the overview effect, the shift in consciousness they experience seeing Earth from space, they speak of a sudden understanding of unity, fragility, and humility. Borders vanish, conflicts look small, and the planet itself appears as one living system. This modern testimony reflects the Stoic insight that stepping back to see your place in the cosmos shrinks the anxieties that consume daily life. You realize that much of what feels overwhelming is only noise on the surface of something immeasurably larger. This shift in perspective also nurtures gratitude. When you see yourself as a cosmic citizen, you notice how much is given to you freely. The warmth of the sun, the renewal of rain, the cycles that support life without your effort. Instead of obsessing over what is missing, you begin to marvel at what has already been provided. Marcus Aurelius often urged himself to look at the beauty of nature as a reminder that he was part of something vast and ordered. This gratitude, born from smallness, softens despair and builds resilience. Even death, the greatest source of fear, loses some of its sting when viewed through this lens. If you belong to the cosmos, then death is not exile, but return. The Stoics saw death not as erasure, but as transformation, the dissolving of form back into the larger whole. Just as a wave returns to the ocean, the elements of your body and the breath of your life return to the universe that carried you all along. This does not erase grief, but it reframes it. Being lost to yourself is simply being found again in the whole. This cosmic perspective also sharpens responsibility. To see yourself as a citizen of the universe is to acknowledge that your actions are not isolated. They ripple outward, touching lives you may never meet. Justice, then, is not only about fairness in local matters, but about stewardship of the world itself. Caring for the environment, respecting the dignity of others, living with restraint rather than waste, all become expressions of living well within the cosmic city. Lostness reminds you of this responsibility by pulling you away from narrow concerns and showing you the bigger stage on which your life unfolds. What makes this teaching powerful is that it is both humbling and empowering. Humbling, because you see how small you are in the scale of time and space. Empowering, because you realize you are free to live authentically, without being crushed by the illusion of control or the demand for eternal recognition. The very feeling of smallness that first seemed to threaten you becomes the key to peace. So when you feel lost, let the sky itself be your reminder. You are not alone in confusion. You are part of something larger, something that holds both your uncertainty and your strength. You are not required to know every answer. You are required only to walk with virtue, to play your part as a citizen of the cosmos, and to let the vastness remind you of both your limits and your belonging. In that belonging, lostness transforms into liberation. When the feeling of cosmic citizenship softens despair and reminds you that you are part of something larger, the question becomes how to live inside this vastness when confusion still clouds your steps. Awareness of your smallness gives perspective, but it does not erase the twists of fate that arrive without warning. The Stoics offered a radical answer here, not only to accept what comes, but to love it. They called this amor fati, the love of fate. It is not resignation. It is a practical art of embracing what life gives, even in times when the path ahead seems like shifting sand. To love fate means to meet events not with bitterness, but with trust that they belong to the story of your becoming. Confusion feels like chaos when you resist it, but it transforms when you begin to see it as material handed to you for growth. Marcus Aurelius urged himself to treat every occurrence, even painful ones, as threads woven into the fabric of the universe. If the whole is good, then each thread has its place, even if you cannot see the full pattern. This teaching is tested most deeply in periods of uncertainty. When clarity is absent, it is natural to ask, why this? Why now? Amor Fati invites a different question. How can I use this? It shifts the focus from complaint to application. Confusion then becomes not an obstacle, but a field of practice. Each frustration is an exercise in patience, each setback an opportunity for courage, each silence an invitation to listen more deeply. By training yourself to love even these moments, you stop waiting for ideal conditions to live well. You live well now, in the middle of uncertainty. One way to practice this is through reframing. When something unexpected happens, the reflex is to label it loss. But if you deliberately ask, what hidden gift might be here? You align yourself with Amor Fati. For example, losing a job may look like ruin, but it may also free you from an unhealthy environment and open time to discover a new direction. The confusion of heartbreak may seem unbearable, but it can reveal attachments that were limiting your growth and push you toward deeper self-knowledge. Reframing does not deny pain, but it prevents pain from becoming wasted. Another practice is daily reflection. The Stoics often wrote at night, reviewing the events of the day not with judgment, but with curiosity. This habit builds the muscle of acceptance. When you face confusion, you can ask, how did fate shape me today? What did I resist that could have been embraced? What lesson was hidden in the discomfort? By writing it down, you train yourself to meet tomorrow's confusion with less resistance and more openness. Over time, you begin to recognize patterns, that what once seemed unbearable often becomes a source of strength later. The discipline of gratitude also strengthens Amor Fati. Gratitude is not only for the pleasant, but also for the difficult. To say thank you for confusion is to acknowledge that it sharpens you, humbles you, and reminds you of your limits. Gratitude does not erase difficulty, but it keeps bitterness from taking root. When you whisper gratitude for what confuses you, you begin to notice the subtle ways it is working for your growth, even before clarity arrives. A deeper layer of Amor Fati is trust in nature's order. The Stoics believed the universe is not random chaos, but structured by reason, even if that reason is beyond human grasp. To love fate is to accept that what comes to you is part of that order. You may not see the purpose now, but you trust that it belongs. This trust is not blind faith, but a rational decision to align yourself with reality rather than fight it. Fighting reality drains you. Accepting it frees your energy to respond with dignity. In confusion, this principle can be applied in very practical ways. When you feel paralyzed by indecision, instead of demanding certainty before moving, take the step that aligns most with your values. Trust that fate will shape the outcome as it should. When plans collapse, instead of mourning the lost map, treat the collapse as the universe's redirection. Ask yourself, if this door closed, what door is being shown to me instead? This mindset prevents stagnation. It turns every ending into the beginning of another role in the cosmic play. The art of Amor Fati also reshapes relationships. Often we suffer because we resist the way others are. We wish they were different, that they would act according to our desires. To love fate is to accept people as they are, not as we want them to be. This does not mean approving harmful behavior, but it means acknowledging that they too are threads in the tapestry. By meeting them without constant resistance, you reduce conflict within yourself. You gain freedom by aligning with reality rather than fantasies of control. Periods of confusion also test your relationship with time. When the future looks uncertain, fear projects endless negative scenarios. Amor fati brings you back to the present. It teaches you to embrace the moment as it is, not as you wish it to be. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself often, "This moment is enough." In loving fate, you stop postponing peace until conditions are perfect. You practice peace now, even in disorder. This discipline teaches you that clarity is not something the future must deliver. It is something you can cultivate by embracing the present fully. Modern psychology echoes this wisdom through studies of resilience. People who thrive in hardship are not those who suffer less, but those who interpret suffering differently. They see meaning in it, even if the meaning is not immediately clear. This aligns directly with amor fati. By interpreting confusion as purposeful rather than pointless, you reduce despair and increase perseverance. Your energy shifts from "why me" to "what now?" There is also joy in this practice, though it may sound strange. Joy comes not from avoiding struggle, but from embracing life as a whole. To say yes to fate is to welcome the entire experience of being human, the highs, the lows, the losses, the gains. It is to see even confusion as a gift of existence. Nietzsche, centuries after the Stoics, said that the highest form of love is to wish that everything repeat exactly as it is. The Stoics would nod in agreement. To love fate is to love the whole story, not just the parts you prefer. This practice also strengthens courage. When you love fate, you stop living in fear of what might come. You do not tremble at uncertainty because you have already chosen to embrace it. This courage is not loud, but steady. It allows you to meet life with open hands instead of clenched fists. Even if the path is unclear, you walk with trust that whatever meets you belongs. That trust turns wandering into journey, confusion into discovery. One final aspect of amor fati is service. When you accept and love your fate, you become more available to others. No longer consumed by resistance to your own circumstances, you have more energy to support those around you. Confusion becomes less isolating because you realize that everyone faces it, and by embracing yours, you can help others embrace theirs. This builds community, the recognition that we are all walking through uncertainty together, each practicing acceptance in our own way. So when the path ahead is unclear, do not wait for fate to become easy before you welcome it. Practice loving it now as it comes. Reframe confusion as material for growth. Reflect daily to uncover its hidden lessons. Speak gratitude even for the things that disorient you. Trust in the order beyond your vision. Act according to your values, not according to your fears. Accept people as they are. Embrace the present moment and find joy in the whole of existence. This is how amor fati becomes practical, not just philosophy. As you close your eyes tonight, let this thought anchor you. The path may twist, the map may dissolve, the future may remain hidden, but you are free to love even this. You are free to meet fate with open arms, to embrace confusion as part of the gift of being alive. In that love, fear dissolves, resistance softens, and life itself becomes lighter. To love fate is to live fully, even when clarity hides, and to find peace not after the storm, but within it. When love of fate teaches you to embrace what comes, even in times of confusion, there is still another challenge that remains. Fate delivers not only events, but also thoughts, and these thoughts often arrive uninvited. Some are whispers of courage, but many are shadows of fear, despair, and false belief. In periods when the mind feels foggy and directionless, the greatest danger is not the confusion itself, but the judgments you allow to root inside. The Stoics warned that every disturbance begins not in the world, but in the mind's agreement with an impression. This is where the discipline of assent becomes essential. Assent means the inner decision to accept or reject a thought. Events themselves are neutral, but when a thought arises, this is unbearable. I am worthless. Nothing will ever improve. You hold the power to either grant it authority or leave it outside the gates of your reason. Epictetus compared the mind to a fortress, reminding his students that impressions will storm the walls, but entry depends on whether the guard opens the gate. In times of lostness, when the fog of uncertainty is thick, this discipline is your protection. The first step is recognizing that thoughts are not commands. A foggy mind tends to treat every thought as truth simply because it appeared. But the Stoics taught that impressions arrive automatically, without your control. What is yours to control is the assent you give. This means you can see a thought without becoming it. This is unbearable may arise, but you can pause and ask, is this true, or is this only my fear speaking? By refusing immediate agreement, you create space for reason to examine the impression before it shapes your emotions. This pause is the heart of the discipline. Just as suspension trains you to hold judgment on external events, the discipline of assent trains you to hold judgment on inner impressions. Without it, destructive thoughts multiply unchecked, feeding anxiety and despair. With it, you learn to sift your thoughts like a careful gardener, pulling weeds before they overrun the soil. You cannot stop weeds from appearing, but you can decide which plants are allowed to grow. In practice, this begins with awareness. When your mind feels foggy, write down the dominant thoughts racing through it. On paper, they lose some of their power. Then ask the Stoic questions. Is this within my control? Is this thought aligned with reason? Does this thought help me live with virtue? If the answer is no, refuse assent. Refusal is not violent suppression, but gentle redirection. You let the thought pass, like a cloud drifting across the sky, while anchoring yourself to what you know is real. Marcus Aurelius often reminded himself that the mind has the power to take back control by refusing to paint events with false colors. A setback is only a setback if you assent to that label. Otherwise, it is simply an event, raw and undecorated. By stripping away the judgments that the mind tries to attach, you free yourself from unnecessary suffering. Pain may remain, but despair is optional, because despair depends on assent. One of the most practical exercises the Stoics used was to rehearse impressions before they arrived. They trained themselves daily with thoughts such as, I may lose my possessions today, I may be insulted today, I may face illness today. By rehearsing, they built readiness to meet these impressions without shock. Then, when the fog of lostness rolled in, they were less likely to be overtaken by destructive thoughts. This is preventive discipline, the strengthening of the guard before the storm. Another method is dialogue with yourself. When a thought arises, do not simply push it away. Question it. If the thought says, "This is hopeless," ask, "What evidence do I have? Is it truly hopeless, or am I impatient for clarity?" If the thought says, "I cannot handle this," ask, "Have I not handled difficulties before? What tools do I have now that I once lacked? This interrogation reveals many thoughts as hollow. By refusing blind assent, you disarm their power. The discipline of assent also sharpens emotional intelligence. Instead of being swept away by anger, fear, or grief, you learn to trace these emotions back to the judgments that fuel them. Anger is often the result of assenting to the belief that you were wronged in an intolerable way. Fear often grows from assenting to the belief that the future must bring disaster. When you identify the judgment beneath the feeling, you can choose whether to keep it. If you withdraw assent, the emotion loses its fire. This practice is not easy in moments of fog. When clarity is absent, destructive thoughts feel louder. But this is precisely why the discipline is so powerful. It teaches you that you do not need perfect clarity to remain free. You only need the ability to withhold agreement until reason confirms. Even in confusion, you can train yourself to say, "This thought appeared, but I will not surrender to it yet." That small act of delay is an act of freedom. Modern cognitive therapies echo this Stoic wisdom. Therapists often teach patients to challenge automatic negative thoughts, to identify distortions, and to separate reality from mental exaggeration. The process is the same. Refuse blind assent. The science confirms what the Stoics practiced. Much suffering is self-inflicted through unexamined thoughts. By withholding assent, you reduce suffering even when circumstances remain the same. The discipline of assent also deepens your relationship with truth. In a foggy mind, lies masquerade as certainty. I know nothing will improve. I know I am alone. These are not facts, but judgments dressed as facts. Withholding assent forces you to separate what you know from what you assume. This humility protects you from despair. You do not need to claim certainty about the future. You only need to commit to what is within your reach now. Another dimension of assent is learning to affirm what is good. It is not only about refusing destructive thoughts, but also about giving deliberate assent to thoughts aligned with reason and virtue. When a thought arises such as, "I can choose patience here," or "I still control my integrity," assent strengthens it. By cultivating these judgments, you build inner stability. Lostness then becomes less about confusion and more about practice, a field where you train the mind to select wisely. The Stoics often described assent as the key to freedom because no external force can make you agree to a thought. A tyrant can control your body, fortune can strip away possessions, but only you can give or withhold assent. Epictetus lived this truth. Though enslaved, he insisted that no master could rule his judgments unless he allowed it. This radical freedom is available in any circumstance, even in the thickest fog of the mind. The discipline also prepares you for resilience in the long term. Life will always send uncertainty, but if you practice daily, you become less reactive over time. Each time you catch yourself about to agree with a destructive thought and instead pause, you strengthen the habit of clarity. This accumulation builds character. Eventually, your mind becomes like a skilled sailor steering steadily through mist, not because the fog lifted, but because the sailor no longer panics at every shadow. As you rest tonight, remember this. Thoughts will come, and many will try to disguise themselves as truth. But you are not powerless. You are the gatekeeper. You decide which judgments to allow inside. In periods of lostness, when the mind feels cloudy, this discipline becomes your anchor. Refuse assent to despair, withhold agreement from fear, deny entry to hopelessness. At the same time, give assent to patience, to courage, to reason. In this way, even a foggy mind can walk in clarity, and lostness itself becomes the training ground for freedom. When the discipline of assent teaches you to guard your mind and refuse destructive judgments, another door quietly opens. What happens when you do not assent to despair, but clarity does not come right away either? You stand in the middle of uncertainty, neither consumed by false beliefs nor illuminated by certainty. Most people rush to escape this place, but the Stoics saw it differently. They saw value in staying with the tension, in living within the space of not knowing. This ability to sit calmly with uncertainty, without demanding immediate answers, is not weakness. It is a profound strength, a gift often hidden from those who avoid discomfort. The poet John Keats called this gift negative capability, the capacity to remain in uncertainties, mysteries, doubts, without any irritable reaching after fact and reason. Though not a Stoic himself, his words echo Stoic wisdom. For the Stoics, endurance of uncertainty was not passive suffering, but an active exercise of patience, humility, and trust in reason's timing. To sit with not knowing is to acknowledge that wisdom does not always arrive on command, that truth reveals itself when the mind is quiet enough to see it. Most of the world equates confidence with having quick answers, but quick answers often hide shallow thought. The Stoic approach values depth over speed, the courage to delay conclusions until reason has ripened. This practice begins by resisting the urge to fill silence with noise. When confusion arises, the instinct is to grasp at explanations, to cling to guesses, to settle for illusions, just to feel secure. Negative capability interrupts this reflex. It says, remain here, in the open space, until clarity grows naturally. This discipline requires humility because it admits the limits of human knowledge. Marcus Aurelius often reminded himself that much of the universe is beyond his grasp, that countless causes and patterns lie hidden from human sight. Instead of despairing at this limit, he accepted it. For him, not knowing was not shameful. It was the honest position of a rational being in a vast cosmos. This humility frees you from the exhausting need to always appear certain. It gives permission to say, I do not yet know, and to rest in that truth without panic. There is also courage in this gift. To sit with not knowing is to face the unknown without flinching. Fear thrives on uncertainty, and most people respond by running toward false certainties. But courage chooses to remain, to feel the weight of doubt without fleeing into denial. This courage builds resilience, because once you realize you can survive uncertainty, it loses much of its power to terrify you. The fog becomes less threatening when you have walked through it before. The practice also sharpens perception. When you do not rush to define or conclude, you become more attentive. You notice subtleties missed in haste, the tone in a conversation, the nuance in a problem, the details in an unfolding event. This patience allows deeper understanding to emerge. Just as a pond clears when it is still, the mind clears when it waits without frantic movement. The Stoics trained themselves in this stillness, not as escape, but as preparation for wiser action. One practical way to cultivate this is through meditation. Not meditation as escape into nothingness, but meditation as deliberate waiting with your thoughts. When confusion arises, sit quietly and let the questions remain unanswered for a while. Notice the urge to resolve them quickly, then release that urge. Over time, this builds tolerance for ambiguity. The unanswered no longer feels like a threat, but like an open space for growth. Another practice is conversation rooted in curiosity rather than debate. Instead of rushing to defend an opinion or force a conclusion, approach dialogue as exploration. Ask questions without expecting immediate closure. Allow the other person's perspective to unfold, even if it complicates your own. This cultivates negative capability by training you to remain present with uncertainty in human interaction, to honor complexity rather than flatten it into premature certainty. Negative capability also nourishes creativity. Many discoveries arise not from rigid certainty, but from the willingness to linger in confusion. Scientists, artists, and philosophers often describe breakthroughs as arriving after long periods of doubt. The Stoics understood this rhythm. By tolerating uncertainty, you leave room for new ideas to gestate. Certainty, too, quickly reached closest doors. Patience keeps them open. This gift further transforms relationships. When someone you love suffers, there is a temptation to offer quick solutions, to erase their pain with easy answers. But often, what they need most is your presence, your willingness to sit with them in uncertainty. Negative capability allows you to be with others without rushing to fix them, to share the space of not knowing together. This builds deeper trust because it communicates acceptance of the full human condition. Another benefit is freedom from the tyranny of perfection. Those who cannot tolerate uncertainty often live in constant anxiety, afraid of making mistakes or of being exposed as ignorant. By practicing negative capability, you accept that imperfection is natural, that not knowing is part of growth. This acceptance dissolves much of the fear that paralyzes action. You become freer to experiment, to try, to learn through doing, because you are no longer enslaved to the demand for instant clarity. The Stoics often practiced this by contemplating the vast unknowns of life, death, fate, and the future. They did not claim to have all answers, but they trained themselves to face these mysteries without fear. For them, wisdom was not about eliminating uncertainty, but about living well within it. This is why Epictetus could say that what disturbs people are not events, but their judgments about them. When you sit with not knowing, you withhold the judgments that magnify fear. You accept the mystery without forcing it to conform to your desire for control. This practice also deepens gratitude. When you stop demanding certainty, you begin to appreciate what is clear in the moment. The breath in your lungs, the presence of a friend, the beauty of a tree outside your window. Uncertainty then becomes less of a burden and more of a backdrop against which clarity shines brighter. Gratitude grows because you learn to treasure what you do know rather than obsess over what you do not. Modern psychology supports this as well. Research on tolerance of ambiguity shows that people who can endure uncertainty experience less stress and greater creativity. They are more flexible, adaptable, and resilient. The Stoics practiced this centuries ago, strengthening their capacity to live without panic in the face of the unknown. They understood that certainty is often an illusion, but strength lies in navigating uncertainty calmly. Perhaps the greatest power of negative capability is that it reveals freedom. If you demand certainty before acting, you become paralyzed. But if you can act while still not knowing, guided by your inner compass of virtue, you are free. You no longer wait for perfect maps. You trust your orientation, even in fog. This freedom is profound because it means life's uncertainties no longer control you. You can live fully without needing every question answered. So as you close your eyes tonight, let this lesson rest in your heart. Not knowing is not failure. It is part of being human, part of being alive in a world larger than your understanding. To sit with that mystery calmly, without panic, is strength. It is a gift that makes you resilient, compassionate, creative, and free. To cultivate negative capability is to practice the highest form of courage, the courage to live well even in the midst of uncertainty. When the strength of sitting calmly with not knowing begins to take root, another question emerges. What happens when uncertainty is no longer just an inner fog, but an outer reality where you feel cut off from everything familiar? For the Stoics, this was not a thought experiment. Many of them lived through exile, stripped of their homes, positions, and communities. What most would have seen as ruin, they treated as an invitation to turn inward and discover a deeper kind of freedom. Exile, both literal and symbolic, became a path to clarity. Exile in its physical form was a common punishment in the ancient world. To be sent away from one's city was not only a separation from land, but also from honor, citizenship, and identity. Yet Stoic philosophers refused to let this break them. They understood that while exile could remove external belongings, it could not touch the inner domain of the mind. The essence of who you are remains untouched by borders, governments, or the judgments of crowds. Seneca, in his letters, reminded Lucilius that a wise person carries their homeland inside, for true belonging is not tied to geography, but to the quality of their thoughts and actions. This perspective transforms exile into metaphor. We all experience exile, even if not by law. There are seasons when you feel alien in your own life, separated from what once felt like home. A job loss can exile you from professional identity. A broken relationship can exile you from emotional safety. Illness can exile you from the sense of control over your body. These forms of exile feel like abandonment, yet they carry within them the possibility of discovery. They strip away illusions, leaving only what cannot be taken: your reason, your character, your capacity for virtue. The Stoics taught that such losses force you to ask, what is truly mine? If I lose position, am I still myself? If I lose approval, do I still have worth? Exile answers these questions by tearing away what you thought defined you. At first, this feels like death, but slowly it reveals a simpler truth. Identity grounded in externals is fragile, but identity grounded in virtue cannot be destroyed. Epictetus knew this deeply. As a slave, he lived in a kind of enforced exile from freedom itself, yet he declared himself freer than many rulers because he refused to let external conditions control his judgments. His life demonstrates that even in the harshest exile, clarity can be born. Exile also widens perspective. When you are forced away from the familiar, you see with new eyes. What you once took for granted becomes visible. What you once clung to reveals its fragility. Marcus Aurelius often reflected that standing outside the familiar rhythms of Rome gave him the ability to observe human affairs as if from above. Distance grants clarity. By stepping back, whether by choice or by force, you see what truly matters and what was mere habit. Another hidden gift of exile is that it compels inner resourcefulness. When external supports fall away, you are left with yourself. At first, this feels like emptiness, but in time, it becomes strength. Seneca wrote that adversity reveals whether we are hollow or solid. Exile presses this truth sharply. Without the usual comforts, you discover what you have cultivated within. If you have trained your mind, exile becomes solitude rather than loneliness. If you have neglected your inner world, exile becomes torment. This realization pushes you toward preparation, toward daily practice of virtue, so that when exile comes, you meet it with readiness. There is also liberation in exile. Stripped of roles and expectations, you are free to redefine yourself. The Stoics taught that freedom is not granted by circumstance, but chosen by perspective. Exile provides the perfect test. No longer bound to the obligations of society, you can turn inward and ask, who am I without titles, without applause, without recognition? What values remain when the stage is taken away? This reorientation can lead to a purer life, less concerned with appearances and more aligned with truth. Even the pain of exile has value. The loneliness, the silence, the rupture, these carve space for reflection that constant busyness cannot provide. In exile, distractions vanish. You are confronted by yourself. The Stoics believed this confrontation was essential. Too often we escape into crowds, into work, into noise. Exile removes the escape routes, leaving you face to face with your mind. What first feels like prison can become sanctuary if you choose to engage with it. Modern parallels show this wisdom endures. Many describe exile in the form of displacement, migration, or even social alienation. Yet in these dislocations, new identities are often forged. People discover strength they did not know they had, creativity born from necessity, compassion formed through suffering. The same principle applies to inner exile, times when you feel cut off from your own direction. Instead of viewing these seasons as failures, the Stoic lens reframes them as training grounds, shaping clarity through separation. Exile also clarifies values. When you lose the familiar, you learn what was essential and what was decoration. Many who endure exile report that the absence of luxury reveals how little is truly needed for life. Food, shelter, friendship, purpose, these remain central, while the rest fades as noise. The Stoics prized this simplicity. They saw exile as stripping life down to its essentials, freeing the mind from unnecessary burdens. What appears as loss can actually restore focus on what makes life worth living. This clarity extends beyond the self. Exile fosters empathy. Having felt the sting of separation, you understand others in their displacement. You become less quick to judge, more ready to extend compassion. The Stoics believed in universal brotherhood, the idea that all humans share the same reason and dignity. Exile reinforces this, reminding you that no one is truly at home until everyone is recognized as part of the same cosmic city. The discipline of embracing exile also strengthens resilience. Once you have lived through separation and discovered clarity on the other side, fear of loss diminishes. You learn that exile cannot destroy you, that identity and peace remain within reach even when stripped of externals. This lesson prepares you for future challenges, making you less fragile, more grounded. Exile, then, becomes not only a punishment, but a teacher. It reveals the illusions you once lived under, teaches resourcefulness, grants perspective, clarifies values, deepens empathy, and builds resilience. What most would call ruin becomes, through the Stoic lens, transformation. The world may exile you from familiar places, but no one can exile you from your own reason unless you surrender it. So when you feel far from home, whether literally or in the landscape of your heart, remember this: exile is not only loss, but invitation. It invites you to discover what cannot be taken, to build clarity where confusion once lived, and to find a deeper belonging that no border or circumstance can erase. To embrace exile as the Stoics did is to transform displacement into discovery, turning absence into presence and loss into a path toward freedom. When exile teaches that even separation can be turned into strength, the path leads naturally to the figure who embodied this lesson more than anyone, Epictetus. His entire life was marked by being unmoored, by living without security, by never knowing what tomorrow might bring. Yet from this shifting ground, he built one of the strongest philosophies of inner freedom the world has ever known. If exile strips away the familiar, Epictetus shows how to live with clarity when there is no harbor at all. Born into slavery, he had no control over his own body, no guarantee of safety, no certainty of belonging. His leg was crippled by his master, a reminder every day that even the simplest physical freedom could be taken from him. Yet he discovered a truth that no chains could touch. The mind is sovereign. You may be unmoored in every external sense, but within you can build a foundation that no one can uproot. For Epictetus, being unmoored was not a tragedy, but the human condition itself. Everyone, whether slave or emperor, lives without fixed guarantees. Wealth can vanish, friends can leave, health can break, reputation can crumble. To demand certainty from the world is to demand what the world cannot give. Survival, then, does not depend on securing the harbor, but on learning to sail steadily even when the waters give no promise of land. His teaching begins with control. He drew the sharpest line in Stoic thought between what belongs to us and what does not. Our judgments, choices, and will are ours. Everything else, health, possessions, status, the behavior of others, does not belong to us. Confusion arises when people cling to what is not theirs, like a sailor clinging to waves instead of the rudder. Epictetus survived uncertainty by anchoring himself only in what could not be taken, his reasoned choice, his assent, his character. This radical focus redefines freedom. Even in chains, Epictetus claimed to be freer than those who were enslaved to wealth, fear, or desire. To him, slavery of the mind was worse than slavery of the body. Those who chase approval, who panic at loss, who cannot bear discomfort, they are the true captives. By contrast, one who governs their own judgments cannot be mastered even in the harshest conditions. This reversal of values gave him strength in situations that would have broken others. Being unmoored also meant he could not rely on the usual markers of identity. He could not boast of noble birth, social status, or wealth. Instead, he built identity on virtue alone. He taught his students that the only measure of a person is how they handle what life hands them. Titles fade, possessions rot, but the way you choose to meet difficulty endures. This stripped-down measure of worth freed him from comparison. He did not need to be like others. He needed only to be steadfast in himself. This perspective shapes how one handles fear. Fear thrives on uncertainty, whispering of possible losses and dangers. Epictetus countered fear by questioning it. What is truly at risk here? If the loss is something outside my control, then it was never mine to protect. If the danger is to my body or fortune, those are externals. The only true danger is corruption of character, for that lies within my control. By narrowing the scope of fear, he steadied his mind. In being unmoored, he discovered that fear loses power when you recognize how little of it applies to what is truly yours. Another lesson from his life is acceptance of hardship as training. He compared difficulties to exercises in a gymnasium. Just as the body grows stronger under resistance, the mind grows stronger through challenges. To be unmoored is not to be abandoned, but to be given material for growth. Every insult, every loss, every uncertainty is a weight for the soul to lift. Instead of resenting the lack of stability, Epictetus embraced it as a chance to practice. His strength was not built in comfort, but in continual training against adversity. He also spoke often about role and duty. Life, he said, is like a play in which you do not choose your part, but only how well you perform it. To be unmoored means you cannot dictate the script. You may be cast as a beggar, a leader, a stranger, or a slave. But the dignity lies not in the role, but in the performance. If you play your part with courage, justice, and self-control, you succeed regardless of the scene. This freed him from bitterness. He did not ask, "Why was I given this role?" but, "How can I play it with excellence?" From this perspective, even suffering takes on meaning. Pain is real, but the judgment, "This is unbearable," is optional. Epictetus refused to add the burden of despair to the reality of pain. He accepted that hardship was part of the human play, and by enduring it with dignity, he proved the sovereignty of the inner self. This attitude not only preserved his spirit, but inspired his students, who saw in him a man broken in body, yet unbroken in will. His teachings also confront the temptation of resentment. It would have been easy for him to hate his master, to curse his fate, to live in bitterness. Instead, he taught that resentment only enslaves the mind further. If you let hatred rule you, you give away your freedom again. The wise response is to focus on what is in your power, your attitude, your integrity, while letting go of what belongs to others. This refusal to let bitterness consume him is one of his greatest lessons in surviving without clear direction. He urged constant vigilance over the mind. Just as a sailor checks ropes and sails, even when the sea is calm, a person must prepare in times of peace for the storms of uncertainty. This meant daily practices, reflection, self-examination, rehearsal of possible losses. By building discipline in ordinary moments, you are not destroyed when the extraordinary arrives. For Epictetus, being unmoored was never an excuse for neglect. It was a reason for greater preparation. What emerges from his life is not despair, but empowerment. To be unmoored is the natural state of all humans. None of us live with permanent anchors in fortune or stability. Epictetus simply experienced it more directly, and instead of breaking under it, he revealed the hidden freedom available to all. You may not control your station, your body, or your circumstances, but you can control how you meet them. This control is enough to build a life of meaning. The relevance today is undeniable. Many feel unmoored in a world of shifting jobs, changing technology, unstable politics, and fragile relationships. The temptation is to grasp for anchors that cannot hold: wealth, approval, certainty. Epictetus offers another path. Anchor in what is always within reach: your choices, your judgments, your character. This inner foundation cannot be shaken by external storms. As you reflect tonight, let this lesson take root. Being unmoored is not failure. It is the condition of life itself. You do not need a fixed harbor to live well. You need only to govern your mind, to play your role with dignity, to use hardship as training, and to let go of bitterness. Epictetus shows that survival without clear direction is not only possible, but can become the very path to clarity and freedom. When Epictetus showed that even a life unmoored can be lived with strength, he left us with a deeper question. What happens in those quiet but unsettling spaces where one identity has ended, but a new one has not yet begun? These are the times when you feel suspended, stripped of the roles that once defined you, but not yet anchored in what will come next. The Stoics knew these transitions well, and they spoke to the emptiness between roles, not as a void to fear, but as an interval that can be shaped with wisdom. The first challenge of this space is the loss of recognition. When a role falls away, whether parenthood after children leave, work after retirement, or relationships after separation, you can feel invisible. The world no longer mirrors back who you thought you were. For the Stoics, this was the moment to shift identity from the external to the internal. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself often that roles are temporary costumes, while the essence of character is permanent. By grounding worth in virtue rather than titles, you carry stability even when roles dissolve. This void also triggers anxiety because the future is unformed. People crave definition, and without it, the mind fills the gap with fear. The Stoics trained themselves to see this openness differently. They saw transition as fertile ground, a field waiting for cultivation. Seneca wrote that endings are also beginnings in disguise, that every departure clears space for something new. The void is not absence but possibility, though only if you resist the urge to fill it hastily with distractions or false identities. Another difficulty is the temptation to cling to what has already passed. Many suffer because they refuse to release the role they once held, replaying the past as if it could be restored. The Stoics warned against this attachment. To hold on to what is gone is to deny nature's flow. They urged acceptance of impermanence, not as cold detachment, but as alignment with reality. Just as seasons change, so do human roles. To mourn change endlessly is to fight the turning of time itself. The wiser path is to honor the role for what it gave and then step forward into the openness of what follows. The void between roles also highlights the fragility of borrowed identities. When roles collapse, you may discover that much of your self-worth was built on how others saw you. This discovery, while painful, is also liberating. It forces the question, who am I without these labels? Epictetus would answer, you are your judgments, your choices, your virtue. These cannot be taken by time, fortune, or loss. To find yourself in the void is to rebuild on this foundation, shifting from external identity to internal sovereignty. Practical strategies for this rebuilding begin with daily reflection. Writing or meditating on what you still control can anchor you during transition. You may no longer be defined by your profession, but you still control honesty, kindness, discipline, and courage. These can form a new center of gravity. The Stoics also urged practicing voluntary simplicity during transitions. By reducing dependence on externals, you discover how little is required to feel steady. The void then becomes less threatening because you learn that stability comes not from roles, but from clarity of values. Another Stoic tool is the practice of role rehearsal. They advised imagining yourself in new circumstances before they arrive, so the shock of change would be softened. For example, a general might rehearse what it would mean to live as a common citizen again. A parent might rehearse the day when children grow independent. By preparing the mind, transitions lose their sting. Instead of falling unprepared into the void, you step into it with readiness, knowing it is part of the natural cycle. Community also plays a role. While Stoicism emphasizes inner freedom, it does not neglect the value of connection. During the void between roles, isolation can deepen despair. The Stoics encouraged engaging with others, not to cling, but to share in the universal experience of change. Marcus Aurelius wrote that we are made for cooperation, like feet or hands, and even in transition we remain part of the whole. Conversations, friendships, and acts of service can give structure when identity feels uncertain, reminding you that belonging transcends individual roles. The void also invites a re-evaluation of time. Without a clear role, hours may feel heavy, drifting without purpose. The Stoics taught the careful use of time as the essence of philosophy. Seneca warned that people guard wealth fiercely but squander time carelessly. In transition, you are offered the chance to reclaim time as your own. Instead of seeing empty hours as burdens, you can shape them into study, reflection, or service. The void becomes less about waiting and more about cultivating. It is also in these transitions that the Stoic practice of focusing on the present proves most powerful. Anxiety grows when the mind leaps into the undefined future or clings to the dead past. By returning to the present, this breath, this act, this moment, you discover stability. Marcus Aurelius wrote that a person lives only the present moment. The rest is either memory or imagination. The void, then, is not truly void when you fill it with attention to what is here now. The metaphor of exile returns here, for the void between roles is a kind of exile from identity. Yet as with exile, it can sharpen perspective. When you no longer carry the weight of old roles, you see what remains. You see how much of your value was borrowed and how much was truly your own. This stripping down is uncomfortable but necessary, for it clears space for authenticity. Without the pressure of a role, you are free to ask not what others expect of you, but what you genuinely wish to live by. The Stoics also saw this void as a test of patience. Nature unfolds in its own rhythm, and to demand immediate clarity is to rush against the flow. Patience is not passivity, but trust in timing. Epictetus compared life to a banquet. You do not snatch food before it is served. You wait until it arrives. The void between roles is such a waiting. By practicing patience, you allow new identities to form naturally rather than forcing them prematurely. Yet the Stoics did not advocate inaction. While waiting for clarity, you continue practicing virtue. You may not know your next role, but you can still live with justice, courage, self-control, and wisdom in the small acts of each day. These practices keep you steady until the new form of your life emerges. In this way, the void is bridged not by rushing across, but by laying down stones of daily virtue that gradually build the path forward. The deepest lesson of the void is that identity itself must remain fluid. To cling rigidly to any one role is to invite suffering, because all roles eventually end. By practicing detachment from roles and attachment to virtue, you remain free. You can be parent, worker, citizen, friend, or wanderer, and when one ends, you do not collapse, for you know the essence of yourself is not tied to the mask you wore, but to the character you carry. So when you find yourself between roles, drifting without title or definition, remember this: the void is not emptiness, but transition. It is the soil where the next form of your life will take root, if you allow it. Use it to reflect, to simplify, to cultivate patience, to practice virtue, and to see more clearly who you are without masks. The Stoics remind us that no role defines the soul. It is the soul that gives meaning to every role it plays. And when one mask falls, another may rise. But through it all, the self grounded in virtue remains unchanged. When the void between roles teaches you that identity cannot rest on temporary masks, the next realization follows naturally. The externals we chase so fiercely, titles, wealth, recognition, even well-crafted goals, cannot resolve the feeling of being lost. The Stoics spoke of these things as indifference, not because they had no value at all, but because they could never provide the inner steadiness we often expect from them. The myth that life can be built as a straight path of achievements and milestones only deepens our disorientation when the line inevitably bends. The mind is easily deceived into believing that if only one more accomplishment is reached, if only a little more wealth is secured, if only the right reputation is earned, then the unease will disappear. Yet the Stoics observed centuries ago that those who acquire these things often remain restless. Seneca pointed out that wealth never cured anxiety, it only changed its shape. The rich man fears loss as intensely as the poor man fears poverty. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that emperors who commanded armies were plagued with the same doubts as common citizens. If power and fortune could guarantee clarity, then those who held them should have been the happiest of all, yet history shows otherwise. This truth can be unsettling because it strips away the illusions most people build their lives around. If wealth, status, and rigid goals do not remove lostness, then what does? For the Stoics, the answer was not in arranging life's externals into a perfect order, but in cultivating inner stability that remains intact regardless of external shifts. Indifference may come or go, but the quality of your judgments, your integrity, and your alignment with virtue are what anchor you. Understanding indifference begins with their classification. The Stoics divided life's conditions into preferred indifference and dispreferred indifference. Health, wealth, and reputation fall into the preferred category. Sickness, poverty, and disgrace into the dispreferred. But all were still called indifference because they neither guaranteed nor destroyed virtue. Their presence could make life smoother or harder, but they could not touch the core of your freedom. The myth of the straight path rests on mistaking preferred indifference for necessities. Once you see them as optional, their power to define you weakens. Consider the pursuit of goals. Goals themselves are not harmful. They can direct energy and inspire discipline. But when life is treated as a ladder of goals leading to certainty, disorientation grows at every stumble. The Stoics reframed goals as material for practicing virtue rather than as measures of worth. Whether you achieve them or not matters less than how you walk toward them, with patience, courage, and justice. In this way, goals become exercises rather than prisons. Wealth tells a similar story. To see money as the solution to unease is to hand your peace over to something unstable. Fortune shifts constantly, and history is filled with examples of sudden loss. The Stoics advised treating wealth as a tool, useful if present, manageable if absent. Epictetus insisted that true wealth is the ability to be content with what is given, not the accumulation of what can always be taken. To anchor identity in money is to anchor it in sand. To anchor it in character is to root it in stone. Status and reputation are perhaps the most deceptive indifference because they depend entirely on others' opinions. Marcus Aurelius, despite holding supreme power, reflected daily that posterity would soon forget him. He reminded himself that many who once seemed important were now names barely remembered, if remembered at all. To live for recognition is to live in chains, bound to the shifting judgments of crowds. Inner steadiness comes when you realize that praise and blame alike are outside your control, and therefore unworthy to decide your peace. The myth of the straight path persists because certainty is seductive. We long for a story in which every step leads upward without detour, yet life refuses to conform to this map. Illness interrupts plans, relationships break, opportunities vanish. The Stoics saw this not as betrayal, but as the nature of existence. To cling to the idea of a straight path is to resist reality. To release it is to gain resilience. The path is not straight, but you can still walk it with steadiness. One practical strategy the Stoics recommended is premeditatio malorum, the practice of imagining possible misfortunes in advance. By rehearsing losses of wealth, health, or status, you remind yourself that these are indifferents. You prepare the mind not to collapse when the path bends. This exercise shrinks fear by teaching you that virtue remains possible even when externals vanish. You cannot lose what is truly yours: your reason, your choice, your capacity for courage. Another discipline is gratitude for the present without dependence on permanence. By appreciating wealth, health, or success while also acknowledging their fragility, you cultivate freedom. Seneca urged enjoying fortune's gifts like a guest at a feast, grateful for what is served, ready to release it when the banquet ends. This attitude keeps you from clutching so tightly that loss feels like destruction. The Stoics also spoke about living in agreement with nature. Nature itself does not follow a straight path. Seasons shift, rivers twist, growth and decay intertwine. To expect your life to be an unbroken line of upward progress is to misunderstand the order of things. The wise person adapts, flowing with changes rather than demanding they conform to an artificial map. This acceptance transforms disorientation into harmony, because you no longer resist the bends in the path, you walk them with grace. Indifference also tests the strength of self-control. When you crave them as though they were necessary, you become enslaved to desire. When you despise them as though they were evil, you become bitter. Freedom lies in balance. Prefer them if they come, endure their absence if they go, but never let them dictate your peace. This middle way allows you to engage with the world without being trapped by it. Lostness reveals the myth most clearly. You may achieve a goal and still feel empty. You may earn status and still feel unseen. You may gain wealth and still feel insecure. These moments are not failures, but reminders that you were seeking stability in the wrong place. The Stoics would say, return to your judgments, your values, your inner compass. Only there lies the steadiness you seek. So when the path bends, when externals fail, when the story does not unfold as neatly as you hoped, remember this: the problem is not that life strayed from the straight line. The problem is the illusion that such a line exists. The Stoics invite you to release this myth, to see indifference for what they are, tools, not treasures, and to cultivate the inner steadiness that no storm can shake. In doing so, you discover that being lost is less about lacking a perfect map and more about learning to walk with stability on any road, straight or winding. When the myth of a straight path collapses and you realize that status, wealth, or carefully built goals cannot give you lasting steadiness, the next lesson surfaces with clarity. It takes real courage to admit you don't know. The Stoics believed that intellectual humility was not a weakness, but one of the greatest strengths a person could develop, especially in times of doubt. To confess ignorance was not an admission of failure, but an alignment with truth. And truth was always the soil from which wisdom grew. The human mind is naturally drawn to certainty, often clinging to it even when evidence is thin. People fear the vulnerability of saying, "I don't know," as if not knowing strips them of dignity or authority. Yet the Stoics argued that arrogance, not humility, is what blinds the mind. Pretending to know when you don't blocks learning, distorts judgment, and leads to poor choices. To face uncertainty honestly requires courage, because it resists the pressure of pride and the illusion of control. Marcus Aurelius wrote often about the limits of his own knowledge. Despite being emperor, he admitted to himself that countless mysteries lay beyond his understanding. This confession was not self-pity. It was strength. By acknowledging ignorance, he freed himself from the burden of pretending. It allowed him to focus on what he could know and act upon, and to let go of what lay beyond human reach. Intellectual humility did not weaken his leadership. It made it more grounded and resilient. Epictetus took the same stance with his students. He urged them never to claim certainty where they had none, reminding them that philosophy is a pursuit, not a possession. For him, the beginning of wisdom was the recognition of ignorance. A student who thought they already knew could not learn. Only the one who admitted gaps in understanding could grow. In this way, admitting, "I don't know," becomes not an end, but a doorway into deeper clarity. This humility is especially important in times of lostness. When direction is unclear, the temptation is to grasp at premature answers, to build false certainty just to escape discomfort. The Stoics warned against this impulse. To admit you don't know allows you to remain open, to continue searching, and to avoid locking yourself into illusions. It is a pause that keeps you free, while false certainty becomes a trap. There is also moral courage in this practice. In public life, leaders and teachers often feel pressured to appear infallible. Yet history is filled with disasters born from leaders who could not admit uncertainty. The Stoics held that honesty, even about ignorance, was more honorable than false confidence. To say, "I don't know," in front of others takes strength because it risks judgment. But this honesty preserves integrity and builds trust, while arrogance breeds collapse. Another layer of courage comes in admitting uncertainty to oneself. The ego resists vulnerability. It prefers the illusion of mastery, even if that mastery is false. Intellectual humility cuts through this pride, forcing you to confront limits honestly. This confrontation may sting, but it prevents self-deception, which the Stoics considered more dangerous than external enemies. You cannot correct what you refuse to see. By confessing ignorance, you protect yourself from hidden errors. Practical applications of this humility are numerous. In conversation, instead of pretending knowledge, you can listen deeply, ask questions, and learn from others. This shift transforms dialogue into genuine exchange rather than competition. In decision-making, admitting uncertainty keeps you cautious where rashness would harm. You delay action until clarity arises, or act modestly while acknowledging the limits of your foresight. In study, this humility fuels curiosity. Recognizing how much remains unknown motivates continued learning rather than complacency. The courage to admit ignorance also tempers judgment of others. When you recognize how little you know, you become less harsh toward others' mistakes. You see that everyone struggles with limits of perspective. This recognition fosters compassion and patience. It creates room for cooperation, because you no longer need to dominate conversations with false certainty. You can walk beside others in the shared journey of seeking truth. The Stoics tied this humility to the dichotomy of control. Much of what we wish to know, future outcomes, hidden motives, ultimate causes, lies outside human reach. To demand perfect knowledge is to demand what nature never promised. Accepting ignorance in these areas is a form of aligning with nature, of respecting the boundaries of reason. You focus instead on what is yours: effort, reflection, and virtuous action in the present. This perspective is not an excuse for laziness or passivity. The Stoics were devoted to inquiry, logic, and study, but they distinguished between pursuing understanding with diligence and pretending to possess certainty prematurely. The former builds wisdom, the latter breeds arrogance. Admitting "I don't know" fuels the pursuit of knowledge by keeping curiosity alive. Closing that door too soon locks you in the prison of your own pride. The courage to embrace not knowing also reshapes your relationship with time. Many waste years chasing the illusion that one day everything will be fully clear. The Stoics urged instead to live well now, even in uncertainty. You do not need all answers to practice virtue in the present. By releasing the demand for perfect knowledge, you gain freedom to act with integrity here and now. The unknown remains, but it no longer paralyzes. Modern science echoes this wisdom. Researchers in psychology describe intellectual humility as strongly linked to open-mindedness, creativity, and resilience. Those who can admit limits of knowledge learn more effectively, adapt more flexibly, and handle stress better. The Stoics practiced this centuries earlier, showing that strength lies not in pretending to know, but in admitting what you do not, and working wisely within that space. There is also joy hidden in this humility. When you release the need to know everything, you can marvel again at the mysteries of life. Wonder returns. Instead of fearing what you don't understand, you can appreciate it. The stars above, the flow of time, the complexity of human hearts. These are not failures of knowledge, but invitations to awe. The Stoics, especially Marcus Aurelius, often reflected on nature's mysteries with reverence, finding peace in accepting their limits. So the next time you face confusion, let this be your response. Do not rush to false certainty. Do not collapse into despair. Instead, stand with courage in the space of "I don't know." Speak it honestly, live it humbly, and let it guide you toward deeper wisdom. The Stoics remind us that true strength is not in knowing all things, but in knowing yourself well enough to confess your limits. In that courage lies freedom, clarity, and the beginning of wisdom. When humility teaches you the strength of admitting you don't know, a new challenge arises. How do you find your place when uncertainty leaves you feeling cut off, as though you no longer belong to anything steady? The Stoics answered with a concept that is both simple and profound: oikeiosis, the natural process of recognizing connection, of understanding that every human being is woven into a larger fabric of life. To rediscover belonging through this principle is not a matter of clinging to roles or chasing approval, but of awakening to an affinity that was always present, even when you felt most lost. The Stoics began this idea with the observation that every living thing is drawn to preserve itself. But in humans, this instinct grows beyond self-preservation into recognition of kinship. A newborn, at first, clings only to survival. As the child grows, awareness extends to family, then to friends, then to community, and finally, in the Stoic vision, to all of humanity. Oikeiosis describes this widening circle of belonging, the natural expansion of care outward. To feel lost often means this sense of belonging has shrunk. You feel isolated, cut off, reduced to yourself alone. Reconnecting with oikeiosis is the antidote. for it reminds you that you are not an isolated fragment, but part of a living whole. Marcus Aurelius wrote that what benefits the hive benefits the bee, and what harms the hive harms the bee as well. This metaphor captures the heart of belonging. Your life gains meaning not in isolation, but in connection. Even in moments of personal confusion, when your path feels unclear, you still exist within this larger web. To recognize it brings both humility and strength. You are small, but you are not alone. You are carried by bonds that existed before you noticed them, and that continue even when you feel most detached. The practice of rediscovering belonging begins with awareness of shared nature. Every human shares the capacity for reason, the breath of life, and the inevitability of death. These commonalities dissolve barriers that often make us feel estranged. When you reflect that the person beside you, no matter how different in appearance or opinion, faces the same fragility of existence, compassion awakens. This recognition heals the loneliness of lostness because it roots you in solidarity rather than separation. Another way to reconnect is through service. The Stoics believed that fulfilling one's role within the human community was central to living according to nature. Even small acts of kindness or fairness strengthen your sense of belonging. To help another is to remind yourself that you are part of something larger than your own struggles. Lostness shrinks when your energy turns outward, for in serving others, you rediscover the ties that link you to the whole. There is also an inner shift involved. Oikeiosis is not merely about duties to others. It is about aligning your sense of self with the reality of interconnection. When you view yourself as separate, confusion magnifies because you try to bear life alone. But when you accept that your existence is tied to nature, to community, and to the cosmos itself, the burden lightens. Your struggles are no longer solely yours, they are part of the shared human condition. This realization transforms isolation into kinship. The Stoics also warned against the illusion that belonging is found only in approval from others. Belonging, in their sense, is not about popularity or external validation. It is about recognizing your natural place in the web of reason and life. Even if misunderstood, rejected, or exiled, you still belong by nature. Epictetus, despite his status as a slave, taught his students that he was part of the same human family as his masters. His dignity did not depend on recognition, but on the truth of shared humanity. A practical exercise here is to contemplate the circles of concern. Begin with yourself, then extend outward to family, then to friends, then to your city, and finally to all of humanity. With each expansion, remind yourself that the same dignity runs through each circle. Heracles, a later Stoic, suggested mentally drawing these circles closer, collapsing the distance until you feel kinship even with strangers. This practice dissolves alienation and restores belonging even in times when life feels directionless. Modern research on belonging supports this Stoic wisdom. Psychologists have found that social connection is a stronger predictor of well-being than wealth or achievement. Loneliness, by contrast, damages health as severely as chronic illness. The Stoics anticipated this truth. They knew that flourishing requires connection, not as luxury, but as necessity. To neglect belonging is to starve part of the soul. To cultivate it, even in small ways, strengthens resilience. The experience of lostness often tempts withdrawal. In confusion, you may retreat from others, convinced that isolation protects you. Yet the Stoics would argue that this deepens the wound. Healing comes not from retreat, but from re-engagement with the world. This does not mean dissolving into noise or distraction, but intentionally seeking kinship, through conversation, through shared work, through simply acknowledging another person's dignity. Each act is a step out of isolation. Rediscovering belonging also reshapes perspective on suffering. Pain often feels isolating, as though no one else can understand. But when viewed through oikeiosis, suffering is recognized as universal. Everyone bears grief, loss, and uncertainty. This recognition does not erase pain, but it prevents the added torment of believing you are alone in it. To know that others walk the same valley brings comfort and courage. The Stoics carried this principle even into their vision of the cosmos. They saw themselves not only as citizens of a city or members of a family, but as participants in the great city of the universe. This cosmic citizenship dissolves the illusion of exile. Wherever you go, you remain at home in the cosmos because you belong to it by nature. This perspective transforms lostness into belonging of the deepest kind. You may not know your individual path, but you know you are part of the greater whole. Belonging also nurtures responsibility. To see yourself as part of the human family means you cannot live only for yourself. Your actions ripple outward, affecting others. Justice, therefore, is not abstract but practical. It is the way you contribute to harmony in the whole. Even in confusion about personal direction, you can choose justice and thereby fulfill your role. In this way, belonging gives purpose when personal clarity is absent. This rediscovery of belonging is not about dissolving individuality, but about anchoring it within connection. You remain yourself with unique choices and challenges, but you also recognize that your life is interwoven with others. This balance guards against both arrogance and despair. You are neither the isolated center of the world nor an insignificant speck. You are a part of the whole, valuable precisely because you contribute to it. So, when you feel lost, do not shrink into the illusion of separation. Remember oikeiosis, the natural expansion of care, the recognition of kinship, the truth that you belong not by achievement, but by nature. Seek belonging not in applause or status, but in the shared dignity of being human, in the mutual responsibilities of community, and in the cosmic fabric that holds all life. In rediscovering this belonging, lostness softens, for you remember that no matter how unclear your individual path, you are never truly alone. You are always part of the whole. When the sense of belonging restores the truth that you are never alone in this world, even in confusion, the Stoics invite us to take a step further. Instead of waiting passively for lostness to happen, they suggest practicing it deliberately. To choose moments of disorientation, to walk without a fixed destination, to let go of the constant urge for control. This was not madness to them, but training. Voluntary lostness becomes a rehearsal for life's inevitable uncertainties, a way of strengthening resilience before fortune strips away the map. At the heart of this practice is the recognition that fear of being lost often harms more than the state itself. The unknown frightens us most when it arrives unexpectedly. But if you deliberately step into small forms of uncertainty, you loosen its grip. This is why the Stoics practiced voluntary hardship, sleeping on the floor, fasting, wearing coarse clothing, so that when real deprivation came, it did not break them. Voluntary lostness is a mental version of the same discipline. By entering unfamiliar paths willingly, you discover that the unknown is survivable, even instructive. Walking without destination is more than a literal act. It represents loosening the chains of rigid expectation. The Stoics observed that much suffering arises not from events, but from the insistence that life must follow a set plan. By intentionally stepping outside that plan, even for a while, you remind yourself that flexibility is possible. The mind learns to rest in movement rather than in certainty. This trains you to navigate unexpected detours with calm rather than panic. There is also a cleansing quality to voluntary lostness. Our days often drown in routines, obligations, and the endless pursuit of efficiency. By breaking the pattern, you see life freshly. Seneca warned against becoming a prisoner of habit, urging that true living requires stepping outside what feels automatic. Choosing to wander, whether in thought or in physical space, interrupts the mechanical rhythm and reconnects you with awareness. This interruption is not wasted time, but a return to clarity. The practice builds courage as well. To walk without destination exposes you to the discomfort of not knowing. Each step confronts the part of the mind that craves control. Over time, courage grows because you realize survival does not depend on always having answers. The unknown stops appearing as a wall and begins to look like a field. This shift equips you for larger uncertainties because you have already rehearsed the feeling in safe ways. It also strengthens trust in your inner compass. When you stop depending entirely on external maps, you discover your ability to navigate with values. Wisdom, courage, justice, and self-control become your landmarks. Even if you wander, you do not lose orientation. This mirrors life itself. You may not know what tomorrow holds, but if you walk guided by virtue, every step belongs to the right direction, even if the road twists. Voluntary lostness also fosters creativity. New insights often come when the mind is loosened from rigid tracks. Writers, artists, and philosophers have long described inspiration as arriving during walks, daydreams, or detours. The Stoics would say, this is not accidental. When you stop forcing the mind into straight lines, it begins to notice connections hidden before. Confusion becomes fertile ground rather than a threat. Another layer of this practice is learning to detach from possessions and comforts. Just as voluntary wandering strips you from familiar places, it reminds you how little is truly needed. Epictetus advised students to rehearse loss so they would not cling too tightly to externals. By getting lost on purpose, you experience in small doses what it means to live without guarantees. This strengthens resilience when larger losses come because you have already tasted simplicity and survived. Voluntary lostness also recalibrates desire. Many chase certainty because they think it will secure happiness. But when you choose uncertainty willingly, you discover that peace does not come from control, but from attitude. You learn to enjoy the journey itself, not the guarantee of arrival. Marcus Aurelius often wrote that life is a flow, not a fixed structure. By practicing wandering, you harmonize with this truth, training the mind to find steadiness in motion rather than in permanence. The practice is not about recklessness. The Stoics valued discipline and reason, not chaos. Voluntary lostness is structured, chosen, and limited, like an exercise. Its purpose is not to abandon responsibility, but to prepare for times when responsibility must be carried without clear guidance. It is like lifting weights for the soul. The resistance builds strength, and in daily life, this can take many forms. You might take a walk without planning the route, letting curiosity guide you. You might read outside your usual subjects, opening the mind to unfamiliar ideas. You might spend a day without rigid schedules, observing how discomfort arises and how you respond. Each practice builds tolerance for ambiguity and flexibility in thought. There is also a spiritual dimension. Voluntary lostness reminds you of your place in the larger cosmos. When you step away from familiar structures, you see more clearly that life itself is a journey without fixed maps. The Stoics embraced this truth not with despair, but with reverence. To wander is to participate in the flow of nature, to accept the unpredictability of existence as part of its beauty. Modern parallels confirm its power. Psychologists speak of exposure therapy, gradually facing fears to weaken their control. Voluntary lostness is a philosophical version of this. By exposing yourself to small uncertainties, you build resilience for larger ones. The brain learns that ambiguity is not fatal, that survival and even growth are possible within it. It also combats perfectionism. Many people exhaust themselves trying to keep life perfectly ordered. By choosing moments of disorder, you prove to yourself that imperfection is not the enemy. Lostness, embraced willingly, becomes liberation from the tyranny of flawless planning. It softens rigidity and nurtures adaptability, qualities essential for resilience. Perhaps the greatest gift of voluntary lostness is joy. When you release the demand for certainty, you rediscover wonder. Every turn can surprise you, every moment can teach. The path ceases to be a race toward a destination and becomes an exploration of presence. This joy does not depend on conditions, but on perspective. The freedom to see the unknown not as threat, but as invitation. So the next time life feels too tightly wound, consider stepping into voluntary lostness. Walk without a plan, let uncertainty touch you, allow the mind to breathe without answers. Train yourself to see confusion as practice, not punishment. In doing so, you prepare the soul for the deeper storms, building courage, patience, and trust in your inner compass. For the Stoics, resilience was never about eliminating uncertainty. It was about learning to move within it. Voluntary lostness is their way of reminding us that the unknown, far from being an enemy, can become a teacher when embraced with wisdom. When voluntary lostness teaches you to embrace uncertainty as practice rather than punishment, the next question naturally arises. If the map is not fixed, then what is the true nature of the journey? The Stoics offered a striking metaphor. Fortune is not a rigid road that you must follow step by step, but a river, constantly flowing, shifting, carrying you in ways you cannot fully predict. To see fate as water instead of pavement changes everything. It alters how you respond to change, how you interpret obstacles, and how you find peace when the current does not move the way you expected. The image of a road suggests permanence and predictability. Roads are built with intention, lined with signs, designed to take you from one place to another in a controlled way. If life were truly a road, every detour would feel like failure, every delay like sabotage. But the Stoics, living in a world of constant upheaval, knew better. They saw life behaving more like a river, alive, restless, bending through valleys, carving cliffs, flooding without warning, and yet always moving forward. Seneca often wrote about the flow of time as something you cannot stop or control. To resist it is as foolish as trying to hold water in your hands. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily that nature itself is movement, transformation, and renewal. Epictetus compared the wise person to a good sailor, not demanding the winds obey, but adjusting the sails to catch whatever gusts come. The river of fortune may toss you, but it also carries you. The task is not to halt its movement, but to learn how to move with it. This metaphor reveals why clinging to fixed outcomes breeds so much pain. When you demand that life follow a straight road, Every bend in the river feels like betrayal. But when you accept that bends are natural, even necessary, your perspective softens. Obstacles become currents that redirect rather than walls that stop you. The Stoics did not deny difficulty. Rivers can be violent, even deadly, but they insisted that inner steadiness comes from adjusting, not from wishing the water was stone. One of the deepest lessons of this view is impermanence. A river is never the same from one moment to the next. The water you touch now is gone instantly, replaced by new flow. Heraclitus, though not a Stoic, expressed this truth. You cannot step into the same river twice. The Stoics absorbed this insight, reminding themselves that every moment of life is transient. To resist change is to resist the river itself. To accept impermanence is to find peace in the very flow that once frightened you. This perspective also transforms how you handle success and failure. If life is a road, success looks like reaching milestones, failure like falling short. But if life is a river, success is not about arriving, but about moving with grace. Failure is not a dead end, but a rapid you learn to navigate. This removes the crushing weight of perfectionism. You do not need to control every outcome. You need only to remain upright in the current, steering as best you can with the compass of virtue. The Stoics also saw in this metaphor the importance of preparation. You cannot predict every twist in the river, but you can train yourself to be a skilled navigator. This is why they practiced discipline in thought and action. When the current is calm, you prepare for storms. When storms come, you rely on habits already trained. The unprepared drown in panic, but the trained adjust. The river remains unpredictable, but your response need not be. Another lesson is perspective on possession. Many people treat wealth, status, or relationships as stable landmarks on a road. But in the river, they are more like logs drifting beside you. You may travel with them for a while, but eventually the current separates you. To cling desperately is to exhaust yourself. To release them when they drift away is to move naturally with the flow. The Stoics urged gratitude for what accompanies you, but detachment when it departs. Nothing is yours forever except your own reason and virtue. This view also reframes time. On a road, you can pause, step off, even turn back. In a river, you cannot stop the flow. Every moment passes, whether you resist or not. Seneca warned of wasting time precisely because he saw it as a current, always leaving, never returning. To live wisely is to ride the river fully awake, not to sleep through it in distraction. Awareness transforms fleeting moments into meaningful ones, even when the larger journey remains uncertain. The river metaphor encourages humility as well. You are not the architect of the current, you are a passenger within it. This does not mean passivity, for you can still steer, row, and adjust, but it reminds you of limits. Arrogance demands that the river flow exactly as you wish. Humility accepts that the river flows according to its own nature. The Stoics saw this humility as freedom, because once you stop fighting the impossible task of controlling the current, you conserve energy for what is truly yours, your response. There is also comfort in remembering that you are not alone in the river. Every human is carried by the same flow. Some may be ahead, some behind, some near, some far, but all are in the same water. This kinship reinforces compassion. You realize that the struggles of others are not foreign, but shared. The Stoics often spoke of the cosmopolis, the great city of humanity, and the river of fortune is one of its most vivid expressions. Different vessels, same current. Modern psychology resonates with this view. Studies on resilience show that those who adapt to change rather than resist it experience greater well-being. Flexibility of mind and acceptance of impermanence reduce stress, while rigid insistence on control magnifies suffering. The Stoics intuited this truth. When you flow with the river, you remain steady. When you demand a straight road, you break. The metaphor also provides guidance in grief. Loss feels unbearable when you see life as a road, because you believe something essential has been taken from the path. But in a river, loss is part of the flow. People, possessions, and opportunities drift into your life and then drift away. Grief remains real, but it is softened by perspective. The Stoics did not deny sorrow. They counseled remembering that the river always moves, to love while you have, to release when it passes, to remain grateful for the flow itself. This is the Stoic art of living with loss. Another application is in decision-making. On a road, choices look permanent, like forks that lock you into one path forever. In a river, choices are more like strokes of the oar. They shape direction, but do not freeze destiny. This perspective reduces paralysis. You do not need to choose perfectly. You need only to steer wisely in the moment, knowing the current continues regardless. By focusing on the quality of your strokes, rather than the illusion of total control, you make decisions with greater calm. So when life feels unpredictable, when plans collapse, when certainty dissolves, remember this Stoic metaphor. Fortune is a river, not a road. You cannot pave it, straighten it, or stop it. But you can learn to ride it with steadiness, guided by virtue, anchored in humility, awake to impermanence, and free from clinging to what drifts. The river flows whether you resist or not. Peace lies in flowing with it. In this way, what first seemed like chaos becomes harmony, and what once felt like being lost becomes the art of moving with nature itself. When the river of fortune reminds you that life is fluid, forever moving and beyond your control, another truth surfaces with urgency. You cannot stop the current, but you can learn how to remain steady within it. The Stoics called this the true art of living, anchoring yourself inwardly when the outer maps collapse. For when plans vanish, roles change, or storms rise without warning, the only refuge left is the calm you cultivate inside. This inner anchoring is not denial of chaos, but mastery over your own response to it. The first step in building this anchoring is clarity about what belongs to you. Epictetus insisted that inner freedom begins with knowing what lies within your control, your judgments, your choices, your values. Everything else, wealth, reputation, health, even the love of others, falls outside. Anchoring yourself means refusing to tie stability to things the river can sweep away. Instead, you fix it to the one domain that is always yours, the realm of thought and will. This inner anchoring does not erase pain. Storms still rage, losses still cut deeply, uncertainty still disorients. But the Stoics distinguished between pain and panic. Pain is natural, a signal of being alive. Panic is the collapse that follows when you mistake externals for your foundation. Anchoring the mind means you can feel sorrow without drowning, face fear without surrender, acknowledge hardship without despair. Daily practice strengthens this foundation. Marcus Aurelius began mornings reminding himself that he would meet people who were selfish, jealous, or deceitful. By anticipating challenges, he braced his mind in advance, anchoring himself in patience and justice rather than being swept away by shock. You can do the same. expect turbulence, and prepare your response. This is not pessimism, but wisdom. An anchored mind is never surprised by storms, it simply adjusts. Another Stoic exercise is self-examination at night. Seneca described reviewing the day, what emotions overtook him, what judgments he assented to, where he remained steady, and where he drifted. This reflection, done consistently, strengthens the anchor. By seeing patterns of weakness, you can reinforce them. By recognizing moments of strength, you build confidence. Anchoring requires this rhythm of awareness, not just in crisis, but in the ordinary days that prepare you for it. The art of anchoring also requires simplifying desires. The more you depend on external conditions for happiness, the more fragile you become. The Stoics advised narrowing wants, learning contentment with little, so that fortune has less power over you. Epictetus taught his students that freedom comes not from fulfilling every craving, but from reducing craving itself. By lowering dependency on externals, you lessen the waves that can unsettle you. Anchoring is not retreat from life, but steadiness within it. The Stoics lived in courts, battlefields, marketplaces, and yet they practiced detachment from results. They showed that calm is not found in silence alone, but in carrying silence within you amid noise. To cultivate this, practice pausing before reacting. When anger rises, delay response. When fear spikes, breathe before deciding. Each pause is a weight dropped deeper into the water, strengthening your hold against the current. Anchoring also involves perspective. Marcus Aurelius often reminded himself to view life from above, to see human affairs as small in the vastness of time and cosmos. This aerial vision shrinks the urgency of problems that seem overwhelming up close. Anchoring the mind requires such perspective shifts. By zooming out, you weaken the pull of panic and strengthen your calm. Another powerful tool is aligning with nature's order. The Stoics believed that everything unfolds within a rational universe, even if we cannot see its full design. To resist events is to resist the nature of things. Anchoring yourself means practicing assent to reality as it is, not as you wish it were. This does not mean passivity, but harmony, acting with reason within the bounds of what is given. Acceptance becomes the anchor that holds when the current surges. Community plays its part as well. Anchoring is personal but not solitary. The Stoics spoke of belonging to the great city of humankind, where support is found in shared struggle, to lean on friends, to learn from teachers, to offer help in return. All of this strengthens steadiness. Anchors can be individual, but ropes connect ships together too. Belonging reminds you that you do not face storms alone. Anchoring also requires honesty about mortality. Much of panic arises from pretending life is permanent. Marcus Aurelius returned often to the meditation that death is natural, neither to be feared nor avoided. By accepting mortality, you stop clinging to what must pass, and you anchor yourself in the present. Each moment becomes enough, free from the terror of loss. Modern science supports this ancient wisdom. Research on mindfulness and resilience shows that those who cultivate inner calm through daily practice are less shaken by crises. Techniques like controlled breathing, reflection, and reframing are modern parallels to Stoic exercises. The principle is the same. Stability is not given by conditions, but built within. Practical steps to anchor yourself include rehearsing misfortunes in imagination, reducing reliance on luxuries, cultivating gratitude for what is present, and committing to virtues in small acts. Each step reinforces the mind's stability. When outer maps collapse, you do not collapse with them because you have already built your foundation where no storm can reach. The art of inner anchoring is ultimately about sovereignty. The Stoics taught that while the world belongs to fortune, the mind belongs to you. Anchoring yourself means claiming that sovereignty again and again in each moment of fear, anger, or doubt. It is not a single act, but a lifelong practice, like dropping weight after weight into the water until the ship no longer drifts with every current. So when life's maps collapse, when the river bends sharply and the horizon disappears, remember this: you carry the anchor within you. It is not made of wealth, titles, or plans, but of discipline, clarity, patience, and virtue. Drop it deep, and you will remain steady no matter how the current surges. This is the art of inner anchoring, the calm that cannot be taken, the stability that travels with you, the unshakable peace at the heart of Stoic strength. When the art of inner anchoring shows you how to remain steady even when maps collapse, the next step is to look at how the Stoics themselves describe the dangers of drifting without direction. Seneca, in his letters to Lucilius, often returned to the image of a ship that sails aimlessly, without harbour, without clear purpose. For him, this was not only a poetic metaphor, but a warning and a guide. Those who live without intention, tossed by every current of desire or fear, waste the most precious resource of all: time. By studying this metaphor, we uncover hidden practices that reveal how the Stoics trained themselves to avoid drifting and to steer their lives with deliberate clarity. Seneca's image of drifting was born from his deep concern about how easily people let their lives slip away. He observed that many guard their wealth with fierce attention, yet squander their hours without thought. A ship without harbour drifts not because of storms, but because of neglect, because no destination has been chosen. In the same way, a life without purpose does not collapse from one catastrophe, but from countless wasted moments. For Seneca, drifting was not loud destruction, but quiet erosion. The first practice hidden in his letters is the deliberate setting of intention. Seneca urged Lucilius to define what he wanted his life to mean. Without a harbour, every wind is useless. Without purpose, every opportunity is squandered. He advised reflecting daily on what you seek, not in terms of wealth or fame, but in terms of character and virtue. By clarifying intention, you drop anchor against drift. The harbour is not an external goal, but an internal alignment. Another practice is conscious use of time. Seneca's essays, especially on the shortness of life, remind us that time is the only possession truly ours, yet most people act as though it is infinite. Drifting happens when hours dissolve unnoticed. The Stoic remedy is vigilance, to treat each day as a complete life, not as a rehearsal. Seneca advised reviewing how you spent time, questioning whether it was given to trivial pursuits or invested in wisdom. This practice transforms time from something that slips away into something consciously shaped. Drifting also arises from the surrender to external influence. Seneca warned that those who lack their own compass are carried wherever society pulls them, into distractions, into shallow desires, into endless comparison. To resist this, he recommended solitude, not as withdrawal, but as training ground. Time alone with thought allows you to distinguish your own values from the noise of the crowd. The Stoics practiced retreats into writing and meditation so that when they returned to public life, they were less likely to drift with the masses. A further layer of his metaphor is the danger of inconsistency. A drifting ship does not move in a straight line, but in circles, wasting energy without progress. Seneca saw the same in people who changed their values with every new influence, abandoning yesterday's commitments for today's fashion. To counter this, he taught the discipline of constancy. Choose principles deliberately, he advised, and hold them even when they are difficult. Anchoring in virtue prevents the endless circling of a drifting life. Seneca also explored the role of mortality in sharpening focus. A ship without harbor can drift indefinitely until it sinks, but a human life has a definite end. He reminded Lucilius that death is not far and cannot be delayed. The awareness of mortality is the ultimate harbor. It gives urgency to choices and prevents drift through procrastination. By contemplating death daily, you cut through illusions of infinite time and focus on what matters now. In his letters, Seneca revealed another subtle practice, the careful choice of companions. He warned that friends who live aimlessly will pull you into their drift. Company matters because human beings naturally imitate those around them. To avoid drifting, align yourself with those who strive for virtue, who challenge you to grow rather than lull you into complacency. This is not elitism, but wisdom. The ship tied to another drifter is lost, but the ship tied to one with a clear course can learn steadiness. There is also the practice of measuring progress not by external achievements, but by inner development. Seneca noted that many think they are moving forward because they are busy, but busyness without purpose is drift disguised as motion. He counseled Lucilius to ask, "Am I becoming wiser? Am I more self-controlled? Am I more just? If not, then activity is meaningless." This practice separates genuine growth from restless wandering. Drifting, for Seneca, was also tied to emotional slavery. He observed that those who let passions rule them are like ships tossed by every wave. Anger, greed, envy, these push the soul in endless directions without stability. The Stoic practice is to discipline impressions before they harden into judgments, to question emotions rather than obey them. By doing so, you reclaim the rudder of the mind. Emotional mastery is not suppression, but guidance. It steers the ship back toward harbor. Seneca's metaphor also points to gratitude as an anchor. A drifting ship looks endlessly for new shores, never content. Likewise, a drifting mind always chases the next possession, the next pleasure, the next recognition. Gratitude interrupts this endless search. By appreciating what is present, you stop the cycle of wandering and rest in sufficiency. Seneca often reminded himself that nature has given us enough if only we learn to see it. Gratitude stills the ship, aligning it with the harbor of contentment. In modern terms, drifting might be described as distraction, endless scrolling, constant consumption, reactive living. These mirror the ship without harbor. Seneca's remedy applies directly. Set purpose, guard time, choose companions wisely, discipline desire, and cultivate gratitude. These practices remain timeless because human drifting has only changed in form, not in essence. At the heart of his letters is the insistence that drift is not inevitable. You can choose harbor by deliberate reflection, by examining your values, by directing your time. But you must choose. If you do not, the river of fortune will choose for you, carrying you to shores you never intended. Seneca's warning is clear. Life is short, and the harbor cannot be delayed. Each day without direction is a day surrendered to drift. So when you feel yourself pulled aimlessly, remember Seneca's ship. Ask yourself, where is my harbor? What principles anchor me? How am I using this day? Who sails beside me? What passions rule my rudder? In answering these questions with honesty, you begin to reclaim direction. You move from drifting aimlessly to sailing deliberately, guided not by chance, but by virtue. And in this way, lostness becomes not your fate, but your training ground, shaping you into a sailor who knows the worth of every moment on the sea of life. When Seneca warned that a drifting ship without harbor wastes its journey, he was pointing to something even more foundational: the danger of confusing what lies within your power with what does not. A vessel with no rudder is tossed by the sea, but a sailor who confuses the rudder with the waves is in even greater peril. This is where the Stoic dichotomy of control takes center stage, a principle that becomes especially sharp when life feels unclear. Confusion, rather than being an enemy, becomes an arena to practice the skill of separating what belongs to you from what does not, sharpening clarity in the very heart of lostness. At its core, the dichotomy of control is simple. Epictetus divided reality into two categories: what is up to us and what is not. Our judgments, choices, desires, and actions are ours. Everything else, fortune, the behavior of others, our health, external events, are outside our power. Lostness tempts us to collapse these two categories, to worry endlessly about things we cannot govern, and to neglect the strength we still hold. The Stoics insisted that true freedom lies in reversing this habit, focusing energy where it counts and letting go where it cannot change anything. When the path is foggy, the first instinct is often panic. We try to force clarity by controlling outcomes, pushing people, or demanding certainty from circumstances. Yet the Stoics remind us that the fog itself is outside our control. What is ours is how we walk through it, calmly, with courage, or frantically, with despair. The dichotomy of control teaches that even in confusion, your agency remains intact. You may not know the entire map, but you can still choose your next step. This discipline is not a call to passivity. The Stoics were men of action, soldiers, senators, emperors, teachers. What they rejected was wasting effort on the impossible. To lament the storms or curse the waves is useless. To trim sails and steer the rudder is wise. Lostness, then, is not the end of agency, but its testing ground. By facing uncertainty, you sharpen the ability to discern. Is this mine to direct, or is it beyond me? That question becomes the anchor. The practice begins with attention to thoughts. Many destructive emotions come from assenting to impressions that confuse control. Anger often arises from the belief that others should act as you wish, though their choices are not yours to command. Anxiety comes from imagining outcomes you cannot guarantee. By interrogating each thought, does this belong to me or not, you cut through the fog. The dichotomy of control becomes a filter, sifting what deserves energy from what deserves release. Seneca highlighted this in his reflections on fortune. He wrote that external blows cannot injure the mind unless the mind agrees to call them injury. To accept that wealth, reputation, and status are not truly yours is to make peace with their loss before it happens. Confusion about identity often stems from clinging to these externals as if they were essential. The Stoic path redefines stability. It rests not on possession, but on perspective. The dichotomy of control also clarifies responsibility. You may not command the outcome of your efforts, but you command the effort itself. A student cannot guarantee success in exams, but can control study and discipline. A leader cannot control followers' responses, but can control fairness and integrity. In this way, lostness becomes less paralyzing. You may not know the final destination, but you know what is yours to do today. That knowledge is enough to keep moving. There is also liberation in this division. Much of suffering comes from carrying loads that were never yours. You exhaust yourself trying to manage others' opinions, trying to prevent every misfortune, trying to predict every future. When you finally accept that these are outside your control, the burden lightens. What remains may be challenging, but it is manageable. Lostness, then, becomes less about being crushed by the weight of the world and more about traveling lighter with the tools you actually own. Epictetus often compared life to a role in a play. You do not choose the script, the length of the performance, or the actions of other actors. What is yours is how you perform your part. Confusion about your role may remain, but dignity lies in acting well in the moment, not in possessing total clarity about the whole story. This perspective prevents despair in transitions. Even when old roles dissolve and new ones are not yet visible, your task remains to bring virtue to the scene you are in now. This practice demands constant vigilance. The pull to overreach is strong, and the temptation to abdicate responsibility is equally dangerous. Some misuse the dichotomy to excuse laziness. It is not in my control, so I do nothing. But the Stoics rejected fatalism. They insisted on active engagement with what is yours, choices, reason, discipline, while releasing what lies beyond. Lostness, therefore, is not an excuse but a crucible. It tests whether you will hide in despair or act where you still have power. One of the most practical applications lies in grief. When loss strikes, confusion deepens. Why did this happen? How could it be prevented? What if things had been different? The dichotomy cuts through this storm. You could not prevent the event, but you can govern your response. You can grieve with dignity, honor the memory, and continue to live with virtue. By focusing on what remains yours, you survive the loss without being destroyed by it. Modern parallels show the same wisdom. In psychology, the concept of locus of control mirrors this Stoic insight. People who focus on internal control, what they can actually influence, cope better with stress than those who fixate on external forces. The Stoics anticipated this by centuries. Their dichotomy is not abstraction, but a daily practice of resilience. The clarity it brings extends to relationships as well. You cannot control whether others love you, but you can control whether you love with integrity. You cannot control whether others forgive you, but you can control whether you act justly. Lostness in relationships often arises from confusing these boundaries. The dichotomy restores peace by reminding you, love is yours, but reciprocity is not. Justice is yours, but outcome is not. By holding to this, you remain steady even when bonds fray. The dichotomy also reshapes ambition. Goals, when mistaken for guarantees, breed despair. But if you pursue them as arenas to practice virtue, the outcome matters less. You work diligently, not because success is certain, but because effort itself is yours. Lostness about the future becomes less threatening when you realize that achievement is never guaranteed, but character always is. In moments of fog, the Stoic asks only, what belongs to me now? Is it my choice, my discipline, my integrity? Then it is mine to direct. Is it the reaction of others, the movement of fortune, the unfolding of time? Then it is not mine, and I release it. This simple practice transforms confusion from chaos into training. Each uncertainty becomes a chance to sharpen discernment, to remind yourself where power truly resides. So when lostness overwhelms, recall the dichotomy of control. Let the fog remain. Clarity does not come from forcing the mist to vanish, but from knowing what is yours to hold within it. In this arena, confusion becomes teacher, fear becomes exercise, and despair becomes opportunity. For as the Stoics knew, no one can take from you the sovereignty of your own judgments, and that sovereignty, once claimed, is enough to guide you through any storm. When the dichotomy of control shows you what is truly yours to direct and what must be released, another lesson naturally follows. Not every answer or outcome arrives on your schedule. Even when you act rightly, even when you guard your judgments carefully, there are long stretches where clarity does not come, where the harvest of effort is delayed. The Stoics knew this space well and treated it not as wasted time, but as discipline in itself. Waiting, for them, was not weakness or passivity, but an act of courage, the art of holding steady when impatience urges you to force what cannot yet be moved. Patience, in the Stoic sense, begins with the recognition that nature works on its own timeline. The seasons turn without consulting human desire. The growth of a tree cannot be hurried by command. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself often that the universe has its own rhythm, and that aligning with it brings peace while resisting it multiplies frustration. To wait, then, is to practice harmony with nature, to accept that unfolding requires time, and that forcing what is not ready leads only to damage. Waiting also demands courage because it exposes vulnerability. To wait means admitting that you are not in full control, that outcomes rest partly in forces outside you. This admission unsettles the ego, which craves constant proof of power. The discipline of waiting is therefore the training of humility. You act where you can, and then you allow events to ripen on their own. This posture is not laziness, but bravery. The bravery to trust reality without grasping at illusions of control. Seneca saw impatience as a form of bondage. He observed that those who cannot endure waiting become slaves to time, pulled in every direction by desire for instant results. The Stoic, by contrast, learns to inhabit the present moment fully, without demanding that the future rush forward. By waiting with composure, you reclaim sovereignty over yourself. You prove that your peace is not dependent on speed or immediacy, but on alignment with reason. Practical exercises supported this discipline. One was deliberate restraint, choosing to delay indulgence even when it was available. Epictetus advised students to practice self-denial, not because pleasure is evil, but because mastery over desire is freedom. By delaying gratification, you learn that waiting does not destroy you. It strengthens you. Each act of patience becomes a weight that builds the muscle of resilience. Another practice was reflection on the scale of time. Marcus Aurelius often contrasted the brief impatience of individuals with the vastness of cosmic cycles. When viewed against eternity, a short wait is nothing. This shift in perspective dissolves the urgency that feeds anxiety. The courage to wait grows when you see your struggle in its true proportion, not as endless, but as a moment in a much larger flow. The discipline of waiting also applies to relationships. Conflicts, misunderstandings, or betrayals rarely resolve instantly. The urge is to force reconciliation or demand closure. But the Stoics counseled patience with others, recognizing that change of heart or growth of character takes time. Justice and kindness are within your control, but the speed of another's response is not. Waiting in this context becomes an act of respect, a refusal to coerce, a willingness to let time perform its quiet work. In moments of confusion about purpose, waiting plays a similar role. Many feel pressure to define identity or direction immediately, fearing the discomfort of uncertainty. The Stoics argued that clarity arises through time, through reflection, through lived experience. To rush into false certainty is worse than to wait in uncertainty. By holding steady in the unknown, you give space for genuine insight to emerge. Waiting becomes not empty but fertile, like soil lying fallow before bearing fruit. Patience also tempers ambition. Goals pursued without patience breed recklessness. The Stoics valued ambition guided by virtue, but they warned against restlessness that demands immediate recognition or achievement. Seneca noted that greatness unfolds gradually, shaped by discipline over years. To accept this is to accept the discipline of waiting, not as resignation, but as commitment to a process larger than your own urgency. Modern psychology echoes this wisdom. Studies on delayed gratification show that those who can wait tend to succeed more in the long term, not because waiting itself brings rewards, but because it reflects self-mastery. The Stoics anticipated this truth. For them, waiting is not idle. It is training in control of desire, regulation of emotion, and alignment with reality. The hidden courage in waiting lies in the refusal to flee discomfort. To wait means living in tension without dissolving it prematurely. This is the same strength seen in the Stoic practice of enduring hardship voluntarily. By staying with difficulty instead of escaping, you expand your capacity for resilience. Waiting is simply another form of endurance, quieter but equally demanding. Waiting also reveals what you truly value. If you can only remain calm when rewards are immediate, then your peace rests on externals. But if you can wait with equanimity, then your peace rests on virtue. Each delay becomes a test. Will you let impatience rule, or will you govern yourself? In choosing patience, you demonstrate that your anchor lies within, not in the quick satisfaction of desire. Even in grief, waiting has its role. The pain of loss does not vanish quickly, and the attempt to rush healing often deepens suffering. The Stoics accepted grief as natural but counseled patience with its process. Time softens pain, and forcing yourself to feel better too soon only adds guilt to sorrow. Waiting here is compassion toward yourself, the acceptance that healing moves on its own schedule. The discipline of waiting also nurtures gratitude. When you are not constantly rushing, you notice what is already present. Seneca wrote that the person who hurries misses the beauty of life itself, always grasping at what is next. By waiting with presence, you learn to appreciate the moment rather than fleeing from it. Gratitude grows when you stop demanding speed and start attending to now. So when you find yourself in uncertainty, tempted to force clarity, remember the hidden discipline of waiting. It is not weakness to pause, it is courage. It is not passivity to let time work, it is wisdom. Act where you can, hold steady where you cannot, and allow the universe to unfold at its own rhythm. In this practice, confusion softens, desire steadies, and the storm loses its urgency. Waiting, embraced as discipline, becomes one of the strongest forms of resilience, teaching you to live with patience, humility, and unshakable calm, even in the longest stretches of uncertainty. When the hidden discipline of waiting teaches you to hold steady without forcing outcomes, another truth becomes visible. Long stretches of uncertainty have a way of stripping away illusions about what we really want. When direction disappears and the old markers no longer guide you, the desires that once seemed urgent begin to lose their hold. Lostness, uncomfortable as it feels, becomes a reset button. It presses pause on the chase, forcing you to reconsider what is worth pursuing at all. The Stoics saw desire as one of the most powerful forces in human life, but also as one of the most dangerous when left unchecked. They taught that much of human misery comes not from what happens to us, but from chasing things that cannot satisfy, or fearing the loss of things never truly ours. When you are lost, the world suddenly removes the usual stage for those desires, the career ladder, the social applause, the planned milestones. This absence reveals which cravings were built on habit or comparison, and which spring from genuine values. Marcus Aurelius wrote often about the emptiness of fame, wealth, and pleasure when viewed from the scale of eternity. He noted that those who once commanded empires are now dust, their names barely remembered. Lostness magnifies this truth. The goals you once thought essential reveal themselves as temporary and fragile. This is not meant to produce despair, but clarity. By stripping away false pursuits, lostness directs you back to what cannot be taken: virtue, wisdom, integrity, the bonds of love and community. This reset begins by exposing the restlessness of unchecked desire. When life runs smoothly, it is easy to believe that the next possession, the next achievement, the next recognition will complete you. But when the path disappears, chasing becomes impossible. The pause reveals how much of your striving was driven not by true need, but by the fear of falling behind others. Lostness interrupts this endless race and invites the question, if nothing external could be guaranteed, what would I still choose to value? Epictetus often warned his students not to desire things outside their control, for doing so chained them to fortune. Lostness dramatizes this lesson. When external anchors dissolve, desire for them appears hollow. This recognition, painful at first, is liberating. You realize that much of your unease came not from being lost, but from longing for what was never truly yours to keep. The reset of desire is the discovery that freedom lies not in getting everything you want, but in wanting what aligns with your nature and your power. Seneca wrote that to live is to learn what is enough. Lostness is one of life's sharpest teachers of enough. When clarity is absent, you stop chasing quantity and begin to search for quality. What matters is not more possessions, but meaningful use of what you have. Not more recognition, but authentic connection. Not endless time, but purposeful days. Desire shrinks into simplicity, and in that shrinking, peace expands. This reset also reshapes ambition. Goals are not discarded, but reframed. Instead of chasing them as the key to security, you see them as exercises in practicing virtue. Success becomes secondary to the way you walk toward it. Failure loses its sting because the value was never in the outcome alone, but in the discipline, courage, and justice you brought along the way. Lostness reveals that ambition without virtue is emptiness disguised as progress. Another gift of this reset is gratitude. When desire constantly points to what is missing, gratitude is impossible. But when the chase is paused by confusion, you notice what remains. Breath in your lungs, the presence of a friend, a moment of quiet reflection. These small things grow luminous when the noise of ambition falls silent. Lostness makes space for gratitude because it halts the distraction of endless wanting and reminds you of the richness already here. The Stoics also tied desire closely to freedom. To desire what depends on fortune is to live as a slave, subject to loss at any moment. To desire what lies within your control, virtue, right judgment, disciplined action, is to live free because no one can take these from you. Lostness clears the field of false promises and forces you to see which desires enslave and which liberate. The reset is a return to freedom, not by gaining more, but by choosing better. This process extends into relationships. Many feel lost when bonds change or break. The initial desire is often to restore what was or to seek replacement instantly. But lostness invites patience, showing that true connection cannot be forced. It resets desire away from clinging or control and toward mutual respect, shared growth, and recognition of dignity. Relationships rooted in genuine value endure. Those built on possession dissolve. Lostness clarifies the difference. There is also a spiritual dimension. Desire often disguises itself as hunger for possessions when it is really hunger for meaning. The Stoics saw this and redirected desire toward harmony with nature, acceptance of fate, and cultivation of reason. Lostness unmasks the false substitutes and points you back to this deeper longing. It resets desire from accumulation to alignment, from having to being. Practical ways to embrace this reset include reflection on mortality. Marcus Aurelius urged himself to remember that death approaches with every breath, not to induce fear, but to refine desire. When you know time is short, many cravings lose importance. You no longer wish to waste hours on trivialities. You long to live in accordance with virtue now. Lostness makes mortality vivid, and in doing so resets desire toward what matters most. Another practice is voluntary simplicity. By reducing attachment to luxuries, you discover how little is truly needed. Seneca advised dining simply, wearing modest clothing, even rehearsing poverty, not to glorify deprivation, but to weaken the hold of false desires. Lostness, chosen or imposed, acts as such a rehearsal. It reveals that peace is not found in abundance, but in clarity of value. Modern thought echoes these insights. Psychology shows that endless desire creates what is called the hedonic treadmill, the constant chase for more that never brings lasting satisfaction. Stoic practice anticipated this by teaching that fulfillment comes not from multiplying desires, but from governing them. Lostness interrupts the treadmill, forcing you off the endless track and onto a quieter path of discernment. The reset of desire also nurtures resilience. When your worth no longer depends on fragile externals, you become less shaken by loss. You can walk through uncertainty without desperation because you know your peace is not tied to outcomes. Desire reoriented toward virtue cannot be destroyed by fortune. This steadiness is the very heart of Stoic strength. So when life leaves you without clear direction, resist the urge to panic or chase the next distraction. Let the pause reset you. Ask what matters if applause fades, if wealth vanishes, if the road never straightens. You may discover that what remains, your integrity, your reason, your ability to love and act with justice, is enough. Lostness, far from being emptiness, becomes the teacher that clears away illusion and resets desire to what truly matters. In that reset lies freedom, simplicity, and a deeper kind of peace than the straightest path could ever offer. As you reach the end of these teachings, let the weight of what you've heard settle quietly within you. Being lost is not failure. It is the place where clarity is born, where illusions fall away, and where you rediscover what can never be taken: your reason, your character, your to live in harmony with nature. From wandering with permission, to embracing exile as discovery, to seeing fortune as a river and not a road, every lesson of the Stoics whispers the same truth: you are enough, even in uncertainty. Lostness is not the enemy, it is the path. So tonight, let yourself rest. Release the need for every answer. Trust that confusion can guide you, that stillness can shape you, and that resilience grows in the very moments you least expect. Before you drift into sleep, I want to hear from you. Share in the comments. Which of these Stoic lessons spoke to your heart most tonight? Your words may be the very reminder someone else needs tomorrow. And if these teachings bring you peace, strength, or simply a moment of calm, make sure to subscribe and join this growing community of seekers. There are more journeys ahead,